Welcome back, Flyers Nitty Gritty fans, to Getting Gritty with It with your host, Yariv. Wolok, my partner in crime as always, Vasili Gianarakos. How are you, my friend?
Doing really well, Yariv. I'm excited. Stanley Cup final time, so always
Yeah.
great for hockey. A great matchup coming up between the Oilers and the Panthers, and that means the draft's getting even closer and free agency. So there's going to be a ton of stuff to talk about in the coming weeks here. How are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing well, dude. Yeah. This is like not really the quiet period. Again, I'm sure people listening have been through many hockey seasons. The quiet part comes after free agency. This is more like the calm before the storm kind of
Great
feeling,
way to put it. Yeah.
Yeah, because it's like that there's a bunch of stuff about to happen and all around the NHL, not just, people are waiting for the playoffs to finish and then the draft and then free agency and then there's just like a whirlwind of stuff around the NHL to varying degrees depending on the year, but we know that it's going to be somewhat crazy this year because of the cap going up. So we know it's going to be a pretty exciting offseason, even if not just for the Flyers, we'll have plenty of stuff to talk about. Even if the Flyers aren't doing anything, we'll have stuff to talk about around the league. And um, yeah, I'm starting to get a little disenfranchised with the idea that Mitch Marner is going to be traded, and maybe we'll talk about that in the second half of the show. But um, yeah, I'll make a note of that too
Sure, we can discuss. Yeah.
because we can talk about that in the
I think it depends ultimately
yeah
just on
yeah.
what the package is. I think the main thing for him is the extension. If they can get an extension and then trade him with the extension, sure. But if you're a team, giving up a ton of assets and then not being able to sign him,
I
you're
mean,
probably thinking,
look what's
why
going
would
on
we
with
do that?
Carolina, right? With
Yeah,
Jake
with Nate.
Gensel.
Yeah, exactly. They
When Jake
gave
Gensel
up a
said he wants
ton.
to, yeah, and they said he wants to test free agency. Um, kind
That's
of
a rough sledding.
yeah. Well, maybe they won't move Natchez now. Um, So yeah, before we get started, just want to remind everybody, please like, subscribe, share our stuff out if you can. That would be amazing. Hit the notification bell for notifications if you're listening to this and you're not subscribed. Please do so now. It's the best way to support our site. We are 34 as of recording this. We're 34 subscriptions away from 1,000. Really trying to hit 1,000. So if you guys could do that, it would be amazing. So thank you all so much for the support so far. You guys are awesome. And also follow us on Spotify and iTunes. Give us a ratings there as well. I've noticed some ratings going in. You guys are awesome. Thank you all so much. Really, really appreciate the support. And yeah, keep listening. It's awesome. And also shout out to our sponsor, Jim Steaks at 4th and South. Make sure to go get yourself a cheesesteak from Jim Steaks. Again, they're reopened now throughout the summer regularly. Have been remodeled and they're good to go. So go get yourself a cheesesteak from Jim Steaks. And also shout out to Summit Public Adjusters, 215-752-0560. Have them check your insurance policies, claims, or your insurance company's claims, and get a second look on it. They will help you keep them honest. Again, 215-752-0560. Okay, let's get into it. News. Not a lot of news. We do have some stuff that's recent to talk about, but the first thing, and I did have this tweet up. I should have pulled it up before we started recording, but I haven't. Okay. So this comes. I'll give a shout out to Shamu Babayev Agency. This is the agency that represents Igor Zamula and Igor Chin Chinakov. This is the tweet. So we're going to conduct negotiations with Philadelphia about Igor Zamula, and with Columbus about Igor Chinakov. The clubs have already told that they're interested in prolonged contracts of these players. Obviously, a Russian translation there, but I guess the piece of information for us is that Igor Zamula contract negotiations will begin. We talked about this already. Anthony DeMarco did report that he, heard that Zamula was most likely staying, or at least that they were working to keep him. Makes sense to us. I think we kind of threw around the 1.2 million a year, maybe a 2-year deal, maybe a 1-year deal. I don't think he's going to be getting much money, at least on a short-term contract. If they want to sign him up long-term, he'll obviously get more than that. But the kid's got NHL potential. He's had a decent season with 30 points. Offensively, he did well. Defensively, he was up and down throughout the season, so I think that hurts him a little bit. But I can't see the Flyers investing a ton of money into him. We did see the number 1.7 million thrown around. Maybe I don't know,
Maybe
but
on a
I
one
just
year.
maybe a 1 year 1.7 million. If it's a multi-year, I think the Flyers will try to get it down. But just a guy who you're not sure or certain is going to be in your top six moving forward. I just don't know how you give him a long-term deal, and I don't know how you give him too much money because I don't know what argument he can really be made. Considering he's an RFA as well. Like he didn't have a Cam York like season in York, and then to match what York got, I don't know. Just seems questionable. What do you think?
Yeah, it's not really surprising to me that the Flyers are looking to resign Zamula. Kind of like what we were saying on previous weeks.
Yeah,
He had a good showing in his basically rookie season. And if you look at all the injuries that the Flyers sustained last year on the back end, it only makes sense for them to sign Zamula and just have him in the mix as a 6, 7 bottom pair
yeah,
type of guy. They do have a lot of uncertainty on the bottom pair as to who really is going to make it up at this point. So at least to have a guy that, has played quite a few games, over 50 games in the NHL, to rely on in that position, just in case. Let's say some of your younger guys that you might want to surpass him, like an Andre, or even maybe like a Hunter McDonald or a Ronnie Attard, or who knows. At least if they don't, make that mark and they can't establish themselves, you do have a guy that has done it before, has played in the NHL before, is aware of, what will be expected of him under a John Tortorella system, things like that. But I totally agree just in terms of what the contract would look like. Like I don't expect it to be anything more than 2 years. To be honest, I'm leaning more likely towards a 1 year deal. I just think the Flyers are looking for cap flexibility with their defense. And then let's say Zamula does improve and plays even better. What's the harm in signing him to a 1 year deal? I mean, you might have to pay him a little more if you want to resign him again, but it gives you flexibility. Let's say if he doesn't perform well, you're not locked into that second year, and you can kind of do whatever you want with that roster spot essentially. So I think 1 or 2 years, and then to your point, right? If it is 1 year, maybe a little bit higher on the cap hit, and then also have to factor in the cap going up a bit. So if it's 1 year, like maybe 1.5 to 1.7, something like that, and then
yeah,
2 year, maybe like 1.3, 1.4, 1.2,
yeah.
somewhere in the one range. We're basically naming all the numbers that there are, but it should be interesting to see what it ends up being. But I'd imagine like somewhere in that 1 to 2 million range for sure.
Yeah, I think I almost feel like because he's so young still, I think he's 23. I don't know if he turned
23 or
24.
24.
I don't know
Yeah.
if he turned 24 yet. He's still pretty young. He started the year at 23 years old. So he has room to grow. And he obviously, we say it on this podcast, they don't hit, most defensemen don't hit their prime till they're 26, 27 years old. So he's got room to grow. Like maybe he'll end up being a 45-point defenseman. You
And he's a
know,
big dude, so
look, he didn't play two-way well enough to prove to be a top four defenseman on a regular basis, but he might still have that upside. So I guess you
like a
could
number
say,
four, right?
yeah, maybe the Flyers would want a longer term contract to be if they believe in him and they believe he'll continue to get better. But there's also the option that if you keep it short term, like a 1 year deal or potentially a 2 year deal, you could also move him at the deadline if another team out there is interested. He's also obviously because he's Russian, could be a candidate to go to the KHL, be one of the top defensemen over there. Um, but I don't know. I don't think we've seen enough of him for the Flyers to say, hey, we're going to keep this guy around for several years. I think maybe even in his part, he might go for that max, more money and get a 1 year deal and kind of bet on himself and say, I can be better than this. And there's a chance that he is better than what we've seen this year. He is pretty young
It's a
and
big adjustment,
he
right?
had
Like
he did get better
playing
from the
your
previous year.
well, no, agreed. And just to add on, like it's a big adjustment, playing in essentially your first full season in the league, right? Like he did
Yeah.
play 14 games in 2022, 23, 10 games in 2021, 22, but 66 games this season, like essentially his rookie year, first time actually making the team out of camp, being with the team the whole season. So it can be a big adjustment and just a big learning curve in terms of what it takes to be a
Yeah.
pro. So this could be a season where he was taking in everything around him, learning the coach, learning the system, learning what does work, what doesn't work, and then maybe applying that next season, you see even a bigger improvement. It's not something that hasn't happened before. Like for a
Right.
defenseman, he's really young, only 24, like we said. So there's definitely chance for him to get better. Like defensemen don't hit that peak till 27, 28, even 29.
Yeah.
In some situations, for some guys, especially for a guy who's undrafted, right? Who kind of, I would say his development path is a little bit slower than a guy that you would draft in the first couple of rounds, right?
Sure.
So I think that you have to factor that into that. There's more AHL time for him, more time in junior for him. So it might take a little bit longer for him to get accustomed to the NHL as well due to that. So
I think also what's tough is that he doesn't necessarily stick out as like you don't know what his defined role is. Like, yeah, he did a good job on the power play. Well, good is good for our team. I would say still
yeah,
bad by league standards. But that's kind of my point is that he's not necessarily your power play quarterback. He's not your penalty kill guy. There's nothing in particular about Zamula's game that he excels at that you can like point to. Having said that, he's pretty scrawny for a guy his size. Maybe he
yeah,
gained some weight. Maybe we don't know what could happen in an off season. So I think for him, why not bet on yourself? Show that you can have a big off season and come in and try to blow the Flyers away to the point where they're like, hey, we're gonna hold on to you we'll give you a 3-year deal. Like the Flyers could choose to do that 1-year deal and then extend it by 3 if he kind of blows them away. If not, maybe he's in a package to move somewhere else because I do think he's
yeah.
an NHL player.
I
I don't think
agree.
we've seen anything to say he's not an NHL player. I think we just haven't seen enough to say is he a long-term investment. And so far that's difficult to say. Um,
I
he's
think that's
worth
I
investing
think
in though
yeah, it's
to
possible.
some
Like
degree.
you look at it, right? He's 6'3", only listed 200 pounds on Hockey DB. Like for a guy who's 6'3", you ultimately would probably want him around
He
two
needs,
fifteen, two
yeah, I
twenty.
was gonna say, he needs like,
Fill out the frame a little bit there, right? At that size. But let's say if he does get up to that, I think one of the main things in his game that I noticed that was kind of lacking is for such a tall guy, he would get moved off the puck pretty easily a lot. I'm
right,
sure the Flyers
yeah,
noticed that. If he can improve on that, he might become even more reliable in his own end. I think ultimately for Zamula, like if he could be a guy that's either your third pair, like number 5, or number 4, let's say that's his best case scenario, and he's like on your PP2, can run a decent second power play, can, has a nice outlet pass. That's pretty good for an undrafted defenseman, right? Like what more can you really ask for?
plus we want to consider the fact that Bradshaw is very good at developing defensemen. That is obvious. And, our defense was pretty sparse last year at times with the injuries. So, a lot was thrown on him. He didn't have the best D partner all year round, right? A lot of times he played with Stahl.
Or
Uh,
rotating.
yeah, or
Yeah.
rotating into position. So I don't want to assume that Zamula can't be more. I just I don't know what his leverage is in a contract situation. Having said that, at the same age, right? Like Travis Sanheim was putting up 30 points a season, right? So it's like
Yeah.
the point production was good for a rookie year. It was very good actually for an undrafted defenseman. So it's like he's also your guy. You've been building him up for years. Like there is some investment there that I don't think the Flyers are going to look to walk away from him easily, but I don't think he's shown them enough to be a long-term investment yet. He
Yeah.
could, it's possible. Talking about it with you right now, like maybe he is kind of a dark horse candidate for most improved next year.
Could
He
be,
is
yeah.
at that age.
It definitely could be. I think for him, especially if it's a 1-year deal, it'll give you the sense on where the Flyers view him. If it's 1 year, it's a make or break for him, I
Right.
think.
Yeah, I
At
think
least with
so.
the Flyers organization, right?
Yeah.
He'll really have to prove that he can get extended and earn that. If it's 2 years, they're giving him some leeway. Like I said, I don't know why. I'm just expecting it to be a 1-year deal. I think just with all the prospects coming up in the defensive pool for them, I think that's what they're going to look for.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. But if we can get him for pretty cheap at a 2-year deal, and that he's a 30-point defenseman, right? Let's say he doesn't
Then
get
why
better,
not? Yeah.
then it's still a movable contract for a guy in his mid 20s. It's not,
Yeah.
it's something you can bury majority of it in the minors if you have to. Not that I'm saying he would go to the minors, but it wouldn't be difficult to move. Especially if you were to trade him at the trade deadline with him having 1 year left at let's just say 1.5 million a year, right? Like if he gets a 2-year, $3 million contract, something like that, right? Like 1.5 million on 1 year deal for
Tradable.
a 25-year-old guy. There's really no risk here for the Flyers. Now, if he's asking for considerably more money, Let's say the Flyers give him $2 million for a year contract. You know, he there's a good chance the Flyers will walk away from him at the end if they do decide to take that on. I don't know. I
Yeah.
just feel like he might go for term, and the Flyers might give him a couple of years here, but I'm not sure. We'll have to see. We do talk about Andre, but Andre's got his own problems, right? He's 5'9". That
Doesn't have
is
the size
right.
exactly.
It's a risk. If only you like combine those two players and it was like Andre's like physical strength for his weight class, and his poise with like Zamula's like natural gift of like being tall and lanky and having the reach.
You
You
have your perfect
Yeah,
defenseman,
you
right?
got a perfect top four guy. So I don't know. I'm not going to assume that they're going to run away from this guy at some point, but he's got to show a little bit more to get long term from the Flyers. Next piece of news we have, and this is, well, we don't have to talk too much about this, but former Flyers, I guess, head coach at one point, and assistant coach Mike Yeo did leave the Vancouver Canucks. He did end up signing with the Ottawa Senators and Claude Giroux. So I thought that was somewhat notable because it is former Flyer involved. I feel like when I saw Mike Yeo leave Vancouver, I'm like, man, this guy cannot catch a break. But then I found out it was like personal reasons. He wanted to move closer to home. Seems like a good dude. And they need a goaltender, or they need a change there in Ottawa. I mean, they underachieved. Uh, they're like Buffalo in a lot of ways, where like on paper you see talent and then it doesn't manifest into what you think it's going to manifest into. But with Travis Green now being the coach and Mike Yeo coming in there, they're going to get that change that they were looking for, at least from a coaching standpoint.
Yeah, it's good for Yo, right? He always seemed like a nice guy to me. Seemed like a guy that is a good assistant coach on a good team. Usually has runs a pretty solid penalty kill. I think with St. Louis when he was the assistant, and with Pittsburgh, they had pretty good penalty kills. Even here with the Flyers at the beginning of the tenure, the penalty kill was pretty good under Alain Vigneault, but then obviously we saw what happened.
Mhm.
But it's good for him, right, to be able to find a place close to home like that. And for the Senators, I mean, it's really a wholesale change for them, right? They need to change something. With DJ Smith being the coach there for so long and getting fired, and then you had um Jacques Martin come in as the interim. Obviously, he wasn't going to stay on in a long-term role. It's kind of just almost a favor to the team to come in and do that, as he is pretty close to being retired. And then getting Travis Green as the head coach, I thought that he did a good job in Vancouver with some younger players like Elias Pettersson first entering the league and things like that. So maybe he can help with some of Ottawa's younger core there. But it should be interesting to see if Ottawa can finally bounce back and be close to playoff contention, because the talent's there on the roster. They just haven't been able to really execute. So
Yeah, yeah, which I'm sure is frustrating to them, but
sometimes you just don't have the right mesh of guys, even though you think on paper that it's good until you actually get them together in the room and on the ice. Doesn't
well,
always work, right?
and
So
typically when you're naming, and this is not a knock on Brady to Chuck, because I do think he has great character. Obviously, so did him and his brother. They both have leadership qualities in spades. But like this is what I hated when Edmonton named Connor McDavid the captain at like 19. I'm like, why are you doing this?
I feel
I,
like that's the only exception, because he's like gonna be the best player
but
in the league, stuff like that. It's
but they
still
were
early,
but they were
but
bad with him
yeah.
being the captain. It's not like his leadership took them. Yeah, on the ice he carried the team, of course, but a captain is supposed to be something different. It's supposed to be the guy who has something to say. It's supposed to be like, I know that there are different types of captains, but like primarily the best captains in the leagues are the ones that can speak for their team. Like we saw what Eric Johnson was able to do in a short stand here, just talking to the media at the end of the year. You're like, oh, okay, I get why this guy is a captain. Just the poise and the charisma, the way he carried himself. Like I feel like that's what your captain needs to be, and you're typically not that as a young man. Like
Yeah,
if
not
you
at
are,
19.
it's an accept. It's a vast exception. We saw that here with Mike Richards. Like Mike Richards had the C, but the real captain of the team was Chris Pronger, and everybody freaking knew it. That was the leader of the locker room. Everybody listened to Pronger. It's like I get why, but like why rush a player into getting a captaincy? I never really understood that.
Sells a
And
lot of jerseys, that's why,
yeah, like
Yariv.
the captain, well, the captain of the Ottawa Senators should be Claude Giroux. And it's not a knock on, and again, he got there after the fact, but it's not a knock, but it's like if you're talking about a guy with the leadership ability who's been there, who's who can perform on the ice and do all of the things that you need him to do, talk to the media and do it, it's Giroux. And instead you're throwing in a kid to do it. And it's like it's not realistic to me. Like young teams don't do well in tough situations. They haven't been there. They don't know how to react. They don't know how to lead a bunch of men. They don't know how to lead 30-year-olds. And I feel like that's part of Ottawa's problem. And I've heard the knock on the locker room. I don't know. I think a coach can fix that, but I just feel like it's unrealistic that all these people, like, you see young teams and they're like expecting young teams because guys were drafted high to be good, and I think it's a little delusional. You
It
know?
depends. Like you need good young players, but you need good veterans as well to surround them. I think for Ottawa, like their problem has always been that they lack the veterans. They finally brought them in, like with Tarasenko,
Yeah.
Giroux, some other guys, but was it too late, right? Is the core already rotten by that
Yeah.
point, with all the young guys?
I
And it
mean,
might be at this
look
point.
and
So
look at Dallas, right? Like Wyatt Johnson and Stan Coven and Heiskanen. Okay, but they have Ryan Suter there. They had Joe Pavelski, who recently
yeah,
retired.
but even Jamie Benn though has been there for
Jamie
so many
Jamie
years.
Jamie
Sagan,
Benn, Sagan.
right?
It's like
So
it's not a team full of like a bunch of kids like taking it to adults, to fully grown men. Like that's not normal. It's not typical. Like your best bet is for your leadership group to be older and to have the right mix. And I thought Dallas did have the right mix, and we'll talk about that in the playoff talk competition. But it's about having the right mix, and I feel like Ottawa could be getting there, and I think Yo can do a good job. You know, with the group he has, he's a guy that young players like, and they need to just improve on what they did last year. Like if they get to where Buffalo is. I think that's still an improvement from the previous year, even if they don't make the playoffs. They shouldn't blow it up or any of that stuff. It's going to be a process. And this is why I don't like tanking, because you destroy your culture in the process. And then you have to build it back up from the ground up without veterans, what was the first thing Chicago did when they drafted Bedard? They went out and they found a bunch of veterans to throw around him. That's not a coincidence. Like, it's not unique. And they were still terrible. You know what I mean? But they recognize we cannot have this kid lead our team, no matter how talented he is. They're children. They're children.
well, yeah,
18, 19
he
years
needs
old.
people around him that have been established veterans and pros that can help him become a pro and teach him, what it takes, obviously
Yeah.
at the NHL
It's
level.
not just the skill
No,
on the ice.
yep, definitely.
Yeah. Okay. All right, let's get into the real meat and potatoes. So we delayed this recording. So we were scheduled initially to record on a Tuesday. Then it was announced that Keith Jones, the president Keith Jones, and Flyers chairman, governor, call him whatever you want to call him, Dan Hilferty, they announced a press conference. They never did their end of the season press conference, so now they're kind of following up. Obviously people were like Michkov immediately, but my thought immediately was there's no Briere at this press conference. This will not be a player personnel type of press conference. Um, I didn't even really know what they were going to talk about. I was like, I assumed that most of it was going to be like vision of the org, right?
Which it
And
was.
which is exactly what it was, because that's what Dan Helferty can talk to, and Keith Jones is not going to talk about player personnel without Danny Briere being there. Let's be honest. There are some takeaways. I don't know. Do you have quotes from it?
I
I
have a
didn't.
few quotes,
Okay,
yeah.
I'll let you do the quotes part, so I'll just keep it topical. I didn't pull up any quotes specifically, but I made notes of some of the things they talked about. So let's get the
Yeah, same thing. I did like some interesting notes. So I'll read a couple of quotes, like the most interesting ones that I have, basically, and then we can just discuss from there, Yariv.
Okay, well,
So
I do have topics here. Go ahead.
oh,
Actually, yeah, it's fine. Go ahead. Read
okay,
one at a
cool.
time though,
So
so we can dig into it.
yeah, exactly. So this Hilferty one, I thought this was the most interesting thing from him really. It's just kind of the overarching view and like the environment that they're looking to make within the Flyers organization
Sure.
based off where it was when, all three of them assumed their new roles last season.
Hmm.
So Hilferty had to say this, entering the second year of the new era of Orange, the first year was about creating an environment, a culture of accepting nothing but the best, creating an environment where players, coaches, management strive for excellence, and that's going to continue. So I thought that was interesting, and that kind of goes into just their mindset in terms of how the management needs to be involved and what type of management styles that they're looking for, but also just what do you need as a professional organization in any walk of life in any business to succeed? I think the main thing was collaboration, right? I think Hilferty touched on that, just that, they want to make it a more collaborative environment across the organization, people working together and, teams working together to achieve their goals, similar to a team on the ice, right? Where the front office is doing things hand in hand and, the organization is sharing with one another, letting people that are really good at certain things be good in their roles, but not overtaking too much. Which I think that might have been a symptom of the prior organization, like where you saw Chuck Fletcher as the president and the GM. He might have been a really good GM, but when you tack the president role on top of it, and he's never done that before, it might be adding too much to his plate. And I think the Flyers in this regime, what they've really been trying to do is bring in people that are good at their respective positions, but not adding too much responsibility to that, so they can focus on what they're good at and
Sure.
help the team with their strengths. And I think that's definitely what we're seeing, at least from the surface level. To me, it seems like they're doing that just with the hires that they've made, and the structural changes they've made in the organization. But what do you think about that, Yuri?
Yeah, no, I think those are very good points, and it's something that Hextall suffered from, right? Is that he didn't want enough collaboration, right? He just had his internal guys and who he listened to, and it also didn't work, right? Because you need like that headstrong person, but that can listen to everybody around him and really like take their opinions. Like we see how great of a job Brent Flair has done. And we don't know with Chris Pryor being the previous head of scouting, like, did he say stuff to Hextall where Hextall just nixed it, right? And we can't really have that type of environment. We need the type of environment where it's like the GM knows what he wants to do and everything he needs to do, but he has people around him that one can protect him, right? Like Chuck Fletcher had nobody like Jones to kind of take heat off of him if needed, right? Like it
Yeah,
was
he was
just
in
it
the
was
line of fire pretty much.
right all the time. And so I completely agree with you. But then, Danny Briere has zero problem like answering questions and being accountable. But then he has that protection. And then Hilferty being so engaged, not like Dave Scott was, and being so involved and clearly involved. And he is doing a really good job of being that character that was missed from the Ed Snyder era. And I think the new structure is working. Maybe it won't work long term, but I think it is working, and I think it will work long term. I think they played it smart, and I completely agree with what you said. And I thought that was you know, I thought it was a little bit of a snooze fest of a press conference, but I kind of expected it.
Yeah, a lot of things that we already know. Like, for example, I think some of the key points, and I'm sure you noted this down just when you were watching as well,
Yeah.
is the fact that they're still looking towards the future, right? Like they mentioned, okay, our main focus, even though we had a great season and we want to build on it and progress, is going to be to the future and building the team as we move forward, not looking at short-term fixes, which if you look at their overall plan and overall process that they've kind of brought forth in the public eye so far, that's been consistent, right? They haven't once strayed from that plan of, okay, we're building this for the future. We're looking to build and develop our young players and build everybody together as a team here. And then look to add those outside pieces later on when there's more flexibility, more cap room down the line, which, Jones and Hilferty also touch on in the presser. But yeah, I really just think for the whole press conference, it's more just a reiteration and a reinforcement of where the team's at
Yeah.
and the strategy that they're looking to employ. Like it's clear that they're still in a rebuild first mentality. I mean, will they look to make an addition or a trade that makes sense for the team? I think so. Like I think they want to improve the team if they can, but I just think they're not willing to mortgage the future yet to do that. I still think that they
Yeah.
really are valuing their, draft picks, valuing their young prospects, right? Where they're not going to trade them unless it's an absolute win for them in the deal versus like, okay, it's a maybe, but you never know. We could end up losing this deal because on the back end, this guy turns out to be a really good player, or this
Right.
pick turns out to turn into something that's really valuable on the ice. So I think, like I said, just a reinforcement of the overall strategy of that they're taking the patient approach, but if there are opportunities to get better that make sense for them now, they will act on that too. So it's kind of just really what Briere has said all along, right? That they're going to explore
Sure.
things. They're
Yeah.
going to explore things, and they're going to listen because that's their job, right? It's their due diligence to do that. But they're not just going to make crazy moves for the sake of doing that or trades for the sake of it. Which I think the Chuck Fletcher regime, it almost felt like, I don't know why, but I feel like with Fletcher, like going into certain off seasons, it almost felt like he was pressured to make a move or like pressure to make a deal or something like from the outside forces. But like as a GM, you should never act that way. And I don't think
I
this regime is doing that.
I think Chuck Fletcher was just doing movement for movement's sake, and
Which is, you
people,
never want to do that, right?
and
You need a plan to ascribe to, which they obviously have here in
yeah.
Briere, Hilferty, Jones.
Well,
So
I've heard people ask for that here, and I can't explain how senseless and pointless and destructive that mentality is. And we saw it. Changes for change's sake, like that doesn't get you anywhere. These vertical changes, most of the time, do almost nothing. I don't care if you found a one-off, if a guy needs a change of scenery. Yeah, that happens if a guy's unhappy or something like that. But like again, I go back to the Jake Voracek trade.
horizontal trade, yeah.
What did that do for the Flyers? It pissed off Voracek. He wanted out, probably because of management. It got us a player that now we're holding on to. We had that, and now we have that extra year. It's like, how did that actually benefit the team? How is that a smart move? How is that a move that makes you better? It didn't. I still like Atkinson. It's not that he was horrible here, but it's just like it didn't do anything. It
It
didn't
was a
do
move for the
anything
sake
for
of
us.
making a move, essentially.
Yes.
That's what it seemed
Yeah.
like.
And
When you like look at it in retrospect now. And the other
well,
quote
hold
that I
on.
have,
So
sorry, go ahead.
before we move on, I this is kind of related to what you said, and maybe this is the quote you want to say. I found it telling, in addition to what you're saying, that Keith Jones talked about what you and I have been talking about on this podcast. Something I've brought up to Steve. When people look at the timeline of this, he talked about the money situation. And he said, look at the amount of money we have, in certain areas of dead cap space or players that are older that are being paid. And he did bring up that, their window for actually looking to make substantial change. I don't remember the exact quote, but he said is like when those come off the books, which is what I was saying, what we were saying on this podcast is if you look at cap friendly and you look at where their money is locked up and how they're planning this, it does seem to be about 2 years away from making a big move because you look at the Kevin Hayes, you look at Ryan Ellis, you look at, which obviously is LTIR for I think 3 more years, right? But that can be LTIR, but you look at Johansson, you look at Atkinson, you look at all these substantial dollar amounts that are kind of sitting there that you have to kind of figure out what to do with them, Ristolainen and whatnot. It does seem to be, even with the buyouts of Tony DeAngelo, that money's slowly coming off the books and the cap is slowly clearing up for them, that he kind of made it clear that that'll be the window where they look to make, maybe a substantial free agent ad. But like to really go after those bigger names, I think our initial guess of like 2 years, a year from now, it's like he kind of hinted at that. Did you feel that as
No.
well?
Yeah, I agree, right? And it makes sense because you're going to have all that money come off the books. So now you have the opportunity to spend if you so choose, if you so feel that the team's in the right spot where that makes
Yeah.
sense. And I think if they do take another step forward these next couple of seasons, make the playoffs, make a round look like they're competitive, then you add those free agents additions or you add those other players now that you have the money, and then your team looks potentially like a contender, right?
Yeah.
And takes you to that next echelon. So I think it's definitely something that they're looking to do. One other thing that I thought was interesting is just like the rebuilding of the Flyers image. They touched on that a lot, like rebuilding the image and making it an
Sure.
attractive place for free agents to want to come to. I think that's definitely important, right? Because
Yeah.
the longer you're a bottom feeder, the longer you're not relevant. You have to look at it from this perspective, like we're people that have been following the Flyers our whole lives, right? and most Flyers fans, that are dedicated to the team, they've been watching the team their whole life. So they're going to be, in tune with the Flyers. They're going to care about who signs with the team. They're going to be all Flyers, right? But you have to look at it from these NHL players' perspectives that are coming up as, young guys and juniors, young guys watching the sport. The Flyers haven't been a team that's relevant, in the Stanley Cup, in the playoff picture for a long time now, right? If you're a young guy coming up playing hockey, you're not going to be watching or really gravitating towards a team potentially that hasn't been that great. So it is important for the Flyers to get back into the playoffs and get back to being competitive, because that's how you get, these younger players as they get drafted and enter free agency and things like that, more interested in coming to your organization. So I think that was a really big piece of it as well that was important. And then just the last thing really that I have, and we can kind of go into Michkov talk, I guess, because this essentially segues into it. But this is the Keith Jones quote on Michkov. He was basically asked about the situation, if they're aware, of anything or any news essentially surrounding it. And this is what Jones had to say. He stated, when we drafted him, the expectation was he would finish his contract with SKA. So we are listening. We are ready. We are reading many of your articles and kind of following along. We have no update on it. We would welcome him with open arms. We absolutely love that he is going to come to the Flyers. If that timeline is sped up, that would be wonderful, but we don't know. We'll watch along closely like you guys are as well. And when he arrives, our fan base is going to be pretty excited about getting a really talented player that is different than what we have right now. So essentially status quo. What do you think about that quote, Yariv?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're playing it safe with that quote still. I mean, they're obviously lying to an extent. Like, they clearly know more than us. I highly
Of
doubt
course,
you
yeah.
need, hockey bloggers to fill you in on the player that you own, that you have a relationship with the agent that we
Yeah.
know
Some
about.
modesty from Jones there for sure.
Yeah, it's more of what we kind of expect. They also, again, did not dismiss the fact that he could come here earlier. Um, they're kind of just more of what we were saying, right? They're playing that politics side, and that's really what I took from it, is that they don't 100% know if he can come over. It's not it is out of their hands. That I do believe. But they obviously have a better inkling of how far along it is in that process than we do. But I think they're playing it smart. And again, that Michkov, like, what you were talking about before about attracting free agents. I think I brought this up last week. It's like, yeah, well, when you add a Michkov, free agents want to play with him. Like,
Yeah.
there are other players around the league that will be interested in playing with the young phenom, right? That's coming to the NHL, thinking that they could play on a line with this guy. And if you clear up this cap, so in the Flyers' mind, they want him here immediately. They know what he brings to this team. They know the attraction and all that would happen to it. But if he comes over next year rather than this year, their mind is like, well, we've cleared out more cap. We've gotten further along in our process, and we're bringing Michkov in. We had 2 first-round picks last year. We have 2 first-round picks upcoming in this draft. It's like it's a big attraction for the organization, for outside interest, media, free agents. It's like all that kind of
Even
ties
money
together.
in general.
Right. Yeah. And look, I just think for them, it's like, if he comes over now, awesome. If he doesn't, we're fine with it too, because we're not trying to win a cup. So we're not like rushing him over here. And he's still young. He's still not, he's 19 years old. Like, you know what I
Yeah,
mean?
exactly.
It's going to be his 19th to his 20-year-old season. And we don't really know what's going to happen with him. You do have a hockey news hub. Maybe you should bring that up in this
Yeah,
portion.
so I'm gonna bring that up. I actually have something else too that I think
Sure.
actually really pertains
Please.
to this. So I think for the Michkov situation and what Jones said makes total sense that he's going to be diplomatic and not say much. I think in this situation, the less said by the Flyers likely helps their case in
The
the long
better.
run.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, and this is my point with that. So this is a quote from Pierre LeBrun. He had an article come out with The Athletic yesterday,
Okay.
and he kind of talked about this situation. In the article, this is what he said about the Flyers and Michkov. He said the Flyers need to approach their situation with caution, as Michkov is still the property of the KHL. It's not the right to intervene. If anything, SKA would be doing them a favor. Something you don't do for someone who's doing you a favor is gloating before everything follows through. That's a great
100%.
way to sour a relationship. This is all just speculation, but being safe is the Flyers' friend at the end of the day. And that's my thoughts too, right? Like, you're not going to gloat that your friend's giving you a new Porsche because he's a really nice guy. Then your friend might think about it. Hey, maybe I want the Porsche. Maybe I don't want to give the Porsche away anymore, right? now that you're acting this way. So that's the way I look at it. With
Plus,
Michkov, like,
plus you want to. I'm sorry to cut you off, but plus you want them to still feel like they're in control of the
yeah,
situation.
exactly. Which technically, I mean, they are in control.
Right.
And I think the Flyers too, they just don't want to step on anybody's toes and offend anybody that's involved in the situation. I
Yeah.
think them gloating or bragging or kind of determining or announcing that, yeah, he's definitely going to come over. It's a high chance. I think that would probably ruffle some feathers because the decision hasn't been made yet, right? So
Yeah.
Sky and whoever's involved might say, well, why are you mentioning that? Because we haven't actually made a decision. And you're not aware of what the decision will be, so it could cause further tensions, for sure. So I think the Flyers are just trying to be safe, and
And
really
we
not saying much is the best thing.
Yeah, and we saw Michkov echo that as well, right? Saying he doesn't have a problem with Roman Rottenberg, right? Like everybody is trying to play nice, and I actually think that that's a really good thing.
Definitely.
That we're not having we're not hearing Michkov disrespect his team, his country. I don't want that. I don't
It's
want
good
him to do that.
character for
Yeah, I
for
don't want
him,
him to.
obviously.
I don't want him to burn bridges. I don't want the Flyers to burn bridges. I don't want us to cut and run. Right from day one, I've been saying this. It always
Well,
needed to be amicable. Always.
it's like with any, business situation. You never know who you're going
Yes,
to do business
yes,
with in the future, right?
yes,
So
100%, dude.
let's say they handle the situation terribly. How do you know 2 years down the line they don't have a chance to draft some other Russian prospect,
What if they
and then they're
draft
in the same.
Demidov or something?
Well, yeah, exactly.
Not
Something
that they
crazy like
will,
that.
but
But either way, right? Like you could find yourself in this situation again down the line. So you don't want to make it more difficult for
Zavragin.
yourself in the future. Exactly.
Zavragin is now property of Ska, right?
Exactly. So how do you know, right? If you botch this, how's it going to go trying to get him out of that contract in the future down the line? So I think that's a really great point to bring up. And just to add on, like I have a
Yeah.
tweet here from Hockey News Hub. I thought this was really interesting. So this is a tweet that Hockey News Hub put out, and it's a quote from Alexei Shevchenko. And just for the context on who that is, he's a respected journalist with Sports Express. So that's a news outlet in Russia. So
That's the one
he's
who broke the initial story of
yeah, both of
he
them.
coming over.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
he's from that same news outlet. Obviously, he's close to the situation in some sense if he has all this stuff to say and he's breaking the story. So I thought it'd be interesting to bring up here. But
Yep.
Shevchenko mentions, on my behalf, I'll add that Matvei Michkov's fate can be decided at any second, and there's a chance that he will not be allowed to leave. It's really 50-50 here. So that's what Shevchenko mentions. And then Hockey News Hub himself also added a comment afterwards saying, I'll just add, with the recent SKA signings of top players and returning veteran players, I don't see Michkov with a chance in heck of being a top six with them. Could he be loaned again? Question mark. Sure. Would he want to be? Not so sure, which is what we've kind of stated all along,
Yeah.
right? And I've stated many times on the podcast, like, who knows how it's going to play out, but the way I look at it is Michkov, I think, would be fine staying with St. Petersburg as long as he knows that he can, play on the team. He's going to get adequate level of ice time. He's not going to get scratched, get benched, all those factors, right? If he goes back to the KHL and they loan him out again to Sochi or however that may be, I don't think that's an outcome that he's interested in personally. I think if that is something that is going to happen, the player himself personally would probably want to be in the NHL,
Yeah.
which makes sense. So
And he's too old. Well, not age-wise, but he's too good to be playing in the MHL. So like,
exactly.
or the VHL. Like it was too easy for him down there. He's a goal game guy down playing against, in there. That's what he would do here in the AHL. It's like he's too good for that. So I guess there's a chance they could loan him out to somebody else other than
A better
Sochi.
team, maybe, yeah.
Yeah,
But then you run the risk,
of
of undercutting
making
yourself, right? Like
right.
you loan him out to a better team, then you face off against your own prospect in the playoffs or like a big game and he totally buries you, like you look like an idiot. So I also don't think they want to do that because they're going to get criticized so heavily. So it's like for them, either he's got to play or they want to loan him out to a bottom feeder
It's
because they know he's not going to impact them on Sochi, right?
it's crazy. And again, I'm not disagreeing with this guy, the journalist, um, because like I don't really know, but the idea that Michkov couldn't play on any team in Siska, or I'm sorry, any team in the KHL's top six sounds like a joke to me, considering he was already producing a top six level as
Yeah.
a
Well, no,
rookie
I
18,
don't
19
think
year old.
I don't think he means of it as like, oh, he's not going to be in the
No,
top
no, no.
six. He means it like with the guys they signed, there's no room for him anymore.
Right, right. But my whole point is like if he's coming here and he's playing
Yeah.
top 6 for the Flyers,
How could he not?
this is
Yeah.
a much better league than the KHL. The KHL is really good, in comparison to the other leagues in the world, but not in comparison to the KHL. They might be delusional about that fact, but there is no KHL team that can beat an NHL. They couldn't beat the worst NHL team. They couldn't beat Anaheim, couldn't beat San Jose. Like that's not in their wheelhouse to do. So like the idea that this kid, you don't have room for him in your top 6. It's like that statement alone indicates to me I still believe he's coming over here because I'm
Yeah.
like that means you're like not even planning around him. Like almost like you're planning like he's going to leave because he already produced at a point per game level that would put him near the top of the league as
Yep.
an 18, 19-year-old. So what is he going to do as a 19, 20-year-old? He clearly slots into your top 6
It's
talent-wise.
strange. It's really strange. Like I wonder, like I said, if it's some sort of back door, behind the door relationship issues with the coach and him. And if it is, I don't think we're ever gonna know based off like Michkov's statements in the media
Well,
and things like that, even Rottenberg's
the
statements. Like if there's some behind closed door issue, like we'll never know about that. And I also wonder too if it could just be maybe a money thing. Like maybe they're paying a ton of money to some of these older veterans and they feel obligated because of the money that they're paying them that they have to play them in
Yeah,
these certain positions.
but why not just be like, oh, well, we have a cheaper option in this kid and we save the money.
Who knows? I don't
It
know.
it doesn't make the only thing I could think of is that there's no way Michkov's defensive game is up to snuff for pros, just as Bedard's wasn't
Yeah.
and
For
Carlson's wasn't,
veterans, exactly.
right? Like Forrester, Tyson Forrester was by far,
That's
in
an
my opinion,
outlier. That's an outlier.
well, he's
Yeah.
also he's older too. He's 22. He was by far the best defensive rookie in the league, by
For
far.
sure.
Like
Yeah.
there was not even a close second in comparison to this kid. That kid you can slot anywhere in your lineup, right? But with Michkov, you're not. There's no real point to playing him in your fourth line at all. Even if he, like playing him 3 minutes a night to check is a
It's not
waste.
worth
It's a
it. Yeah.
complete waste. One, he's not going to be the best checker, on your organization comparison of veteran players. Like his high end skill set is what makes him so valuable, is his ability to produce offense. So that's where I'm kind of like, I get from that aspect that maybe like his defensive game is not up to snuff, but his offensive game is beyond, quite frankly, anyone on Siska's team. Like I don't need to watch them too much. I recognize some of the names on their team. You know what I mean? There, some of those guys from North America. None of them are as good as Michkov.
Yes,
Let's
he
be
looks to
honest.
be their best offensive
Offensively,
player for sure. So it's puzzling to me, but just with the inklings and I guess with what we heard, I guess from Shevchenko and Hockey News Hub's comments, like I'm sure Hockey News Hub with all the KHL stuff he reports might have some insight. Maybe Shevchenko, obviously being a reporter in Russia, I'm sure has sources close to the situation.
yeah,
That's how he's getting and breaking these stories in the first place. So
sure.
just with that, I think it is pointing even more towards him coming here. Obviously, who knows? He said it's 50-50, but I just think not to say the writing's on the wall, but all the pieces are lining up that it looks as though he's going to come here. Obviously, we're not making guarantees or anything. We got to wait and see, but I just think with all the latest news, there's nothing jumping out at me that's like, oh yeah, he's definitely not coming, right? So
Right. Yeah, we have not heard anything like that. It's a very interesting situation with this kid because we really don't know what's going on. I wonder if
it's a fluid situation
I
too, for
wonder if
sure.
this well, I wonder if this media site's trying to kind of cover up for the fact that they already announced he was coming over, and it's kind of like what we were talking about earlier.
Yeah,
It's like
exactly.
maybe they're now trying to backtrack and be like, "Oh, we shouldn't have said that," even if
Because he
we
might not be.
have
Yeah,
been, or not even that, or like, "Hey, this is Russia, and like, don't go running your mouth." We might have told you that in, off the
confidence.
record or something, or in
Yeah,
confidence, and you went ahead and published it. And now we look, without a deal being done. The deal obviously wasn't done. If it was done, he would be over here already. And
exactly. It
they
could be causing extra tension to the deal, maybe.
well, I mean, the chairman of the team told us what the deadline is, which is the end of June, and
Yeah.
you announced it at the end of May, like a whole month early. So maybe it's a little bit of backtracking to be like, hey, like let's not like. There's no way they didn't see what happened in Philly. You know what I mean? From their comments.
Yeah,
And
I
again,
agree.
this is what the Flyers were trying to avoid. This is what they were trying to avoid. So I think there's some of that like damage control going on. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, from a news outlet, it makes a ton of sense. No news outlet ever really wants to be wrong. So you putting out a statement saying it's a 50-50 chance, you're kind of covering your bases in a sense. So I definitely get it
Yeah.
from their perspective.
And also trying to, cover the team from, making them look like they told you something that maybe they weren't ready to announce, or maybe
Yeah.
they weren't 100% on that. Maybe they were 80% on the decision and 20% of them were like, well, maybe we'll loan them out here. Maybe we know. Let me ask you this. After everything we heard from Medvedev, right, the chairman, what we heard from what we know is Michkov's opinion from his father passing away, like, is it, is there any real chance it was sent him back to Sochi again?
No, I mean, I don't think he wants to go there, but obviously he has no choice. Like, I think the player, if it was up to him and he knew, okay, I'm not going to play with Ska, like I've mentioned this before on the show, right? Like, if Michkov knows, okay, I have no chance of playing with Ska and I have to go back to Sochi, I think it's his preference to probably be in the NHL. And
But I mean,
that might be where this all comes from because the team might know, hey, like, we're not going to play you and we're going to loan you again. And he's like, well, I don't want that. Get me out of here.
or I
Right?
don't want to go back to Sochi and I'm
Yeah.
open to a loan. But then to your point, right, we're not going to send him to one of the better teams in the league,
One of our rivals, yeah.
which again also doesn't make sense to me because he's going to hurt you. He did it
Yeah.
when he played against you in Sochi.
And they were
Like,
bad.
right.
Yeah.
And
So
you like he's better than players on your roster. They are not they didn't win the championship, right?
yeah, it's definitely a puzzling situation. Like years and years after this all unfolds, I wonder if we're ever gonna find out maybe like what was the cause of all of
And
this in terms of their
and also
relationship. But
the I'm sorry to cut you off, but it's also the Rottenberg not selecting him for the under 25 Russian team.
also a sign to me that like it's
This is
not
a
a good relationship. So
generational Russian talent. Like I
yeah.
know that there's nonsense that I heard about Demidov being better than Michkov. He has yet to prove that. He hasn't even played against men like Michkov. This kid is breaking records in their league.
Yeah. Yeah.
Imagine like that's like Bedard being here and us being like, oh, he wants to play for IHF Canadian team, and them being like, yeah, he's not good enough yet. It's like
And didn't select him, yeah. Which by the way, he was
who's
on
buying that? That's
Canada's
my
world
point.
championship
But
team, right?
but
Nobody's buying that.
that's what I'm saying. I was like, it's hard to buy the inconsistencies in all of this and
That's
not
why
and think that he's not coming here.
that's what I mean. I just think everything in the whole situation to me points to him leaving early. But who knows, right? Like maybe they can't get to a deal or an agreement. Maybe this is posturing because Ska really wants to play him like in their, top three lines, and they're saying, hey, like we know you can go to the NHL, but like we really want you here. Like,
That's
what
what
will it
they
take?
should do.
Yeah, but
If I was in
obviously
their
it doesn't seem
position,
like that's what they are doing
he's
to
in
me.
my top 9 and he's on my top power play. You know what I'm saying? Like, don't give him top 6, but play him in the top 9. Don't pay him 3 minutes a night. Like, he clearly was much better than that in the preseason. He outplayed all of these guys. So, like, I'm so baffled by the inconsistencies of what's being said and what, it's like I get the play nice and all that stuff, but like I don't understand not utilizing a talent of this level. That's what I don't get.
There's got to be something or some reason that they have, like Ska has, behind closed doors that we're not aware of, or else it just doesn't make a lot of sense. But it could just be at the end of the day, right? Like it could just be that Russian cultural type of stubbornness, right?
Well, they
Where
don't play
they,
young players in
yeah,
Russia.
well, that's what I mean. They just don't do it. So maybe it's kind of like, well, we don't really care how good you are, kid. You're gonna wait in line like everybody else does. And maybe that's just how it is with Ska and their organization. Like, if maybe we should do this going into next week's episode. Actually, I'll look it up, but I'm interested to know or see like when was the last time a 19-year-old played a full season with that team.
Yeah,
Maybe
no,
I'll
no.
try to do some research and we can bring it up next week.
Yeah.
Because
It
if it's never happened, right? Like, let's say a 19-year-old has never in the history of Ska played a full season with them at age 19, then I kind of get it that maybe it's an organizational practice where they just do not have guys this young on the main team. It just
but
isn't
but
what they
we
do.
know it's an organizational change because we saw Michkov play at 16, 17.
Yeah,
more
like
substantial games with more ice time than when Rottenberg got there.
yeah, exactly. When Valeri Bragin was the coach, he played like half the season. So I mean, my read on it is there's some sort of issue with the coach and the player, and it's untenable, and that's kind of what's causing this all and why they don't want to play him, in the top six despite him being such a good player. Like I
And
said, for me, it's
it
all
might not
leaning that
even
he's going
be
to get here
it might
early.
not even
So
be yeah, no, I agree with you, but I think it might not even be personal. It might be just it's a philosophy change.
yep.
Roman Rottenberg's attitude is different. But then why pick Zavragan for that under 25 team who's younger than
Yeah,
Michkov?
that's what makes it seem to
And
be
he's a
like it's a
goalie.
person. Well, that's what makes it seem to me that it's a personal issue between the two. That because it's an under 25 team at that point. So this is a team literally consisting of just young players. So even
Yeah,
if you have the philosophy, even if you have the philosophy of okay, on the Scott team in the KHL, we don't play young players who are not playing. Obviously, you pick them on the under 25 team. So it's real weird. It's a real puzzling situation. I could talk about it for hours,
I
but
know.
we're never gonna figure it out on our end,
No, we have to just
unfortunately,
wait.
until it happens.
Yeah, we have to
But
just
I
wait.
think you know what, like the initial timeline was June 30th. I think that week, of the final week of June, we're probably gonna hear something or
Yeah.
some sort of
Yeah.
news, I'd imagine.
I agree. I think we just have to be patient and focus on the draft for now. And again, I still I think we both agree with this, right? I don't want to speak for you, but I think we both agree that, regardless, it seems like Michkov is going to be leaving this contract early. If it's not this year, it's probably next year. Um, because it doesn't seem like the situation is one that Michkov really wants to wait on. And it seems like he's ready to come over to the NHL and we'll work out a deal to do so. And that contract, like, I brought up initially that the contract he would get from the Flyers would be substantially larger than what he is being paid in all 3 years. His first year alone would be worth like more than double what his entire 3 year contract would be. Because again, maybe on paper you see a $950,000 a year annual salary, but with the bonuses that will be included in his contract, it'll be closer to 3.5 million, which way exceeds what he gets paid in Russia. So, and while Russia has money, they don't pay young players like excessive amounts of money. Like this kid is not being played and he's not being paid the way he could be in the NHL, and I think he recognizes that. All right. So there's still more to talk about from this press conference. The one thing, I don't know if it's that relevant, but I guess it's a little bit relevant. Hilferty was asked about, what's going on with the Sixers as well. And I don't know if you're as aware of this as,
Yeah.
yeah.
They might
So
they might want to leave Wells Fargo,
Wells
correct, and have their own
Fargo,
building.
yeah, in 31. And it does seem like he's pretty adamant. I will say this: I'm kind of behind the idea of keeping the Sixers playing in South Philly.
Yeah.
Um, I don't because if you think about it, there's a trickle down effect with them leaving. The building will be empty. A lot of the nights where it wasn't. So there's profitability problems that not for Comcast overall, but for Comcast Spectacor. So they can fill it with other things for sure.
Concerts, whatever
But
it
there's
may
yeah,
be.
but there was a $6 billion investment made into South Philly. For those who are not aware, six
All the
billion
upgrades,
dollars.
right?
Yeah, no, it's actually for the Navy Yard, which is right by the stadiums. I actually used to work for Urban Outfitters Inc., the corporation in the Navy Yard. This was a while ago now, but they're trying to build that whole place up to more modern like living and having a whole huge community there. So there's like this huge city incentivized there, and our new Mayor Parker, she's like, there's no way they're going to want to back off of that. So I just found that a little bit interesting that he was asked about it, and he seems pretty confident, but he's so diplomatic in everything he says.
Yeah, what's he really gonna say, right?
Yeah.
But
But
I thought that was
I thought it was
interesting
interesting.
too. I would say just to end off, like it's usually strange to me to have like professional basketball team, hockey team kind of split up different arenas in the same city. I don't think you really ever see that in many cities, right? Like
Yeah.
most teams that play, hockey in the same arena, the basketball team for that same city also plays in that same
Right.
arena. Like pretty much 90% of the time. So I find it hard to think that the Sixers are going to move away. They're just probably trying to position themselves and get the best possible deal that they can, which
Yeah.
any organization would do that. So
Yeah. And South Philly is, have you been to South Philly here yet?
no.
No, you haven't. We'll have to get you down here eventually. And go to like a Flyers game or something. Because you got to see what they're trying to do here. Like there's been a massive investment, Xfinity Live, there's the casino that was built down there. There is this like humongous investment over the next 15 years to.
Like a whole fun area around the arena type of
Right,
deal, right? Which makes
exactly.
sense.
And to
So
have the Sixers bail on that like halfway through is like
kind of puts a wrench in your whole plan in terms of,
to some degree,
the
yes.
city planning and what you were trying to accomplish.
Yeah, because
So yeah.
the Phillies and the Eagles are not leaving, and I cannot see the Flyers leaving South Philly. Because it would be weird if all of a sudden the Flyers and the Sixers moved, to Center City. Not that the Flyers are thinking about it, but the Sixers are a very big draw in this city, and I get why they want Center City, but I don't know. I thought it was interesting he was asked about that, but I think the main takeaways were just like we're sticking to the plan. There's hints about removing money from the team to wait to make that big move, the Michkov stuff, and that was primarily it. Like,
Yeah, and then perception of the team, like building the culture back up, making it like a place where the players want to play again. I've
right,
noticed that that was like a big theme. But like you were saying, right, it wasn't really a big conference in terms of things we don't already know. It's more of a reinforcement of the things we do know and sticking to those plans. So
yeah,
almost like a status quo type of press conference in a sense, right? We didn't
yeah.
really get any earth-shattering news or anything like that.
Yeah. And I had the option of going down there. I was a little busy today, and I was like, this press conference not really going to be a big deal. And like I didn't expect. Just so you guys know, if Michkov is going to be announced, Danny Briere is going to be involved in that. That is not going
Danny
to be
Briere
a
is going to be announcing it. He's the GM, man.
yes.
So
So it's not going to be a case where it's Dan Hilferty and Jones making the announcement alone, unless Danny Briere is getting fired. Which, let's be honest, the odds of that happening at this point are slim to none. Um, all right, so the next topic we have on the list is I wanted to revisit the Travis Konecny because I was pretty dismissive of the idea of trading Konecny because I believe that it's the right thing to do to re-sign him. I believe in his longevity. I believe that you don't build a player internally, have him turn into a star player, have him lead your team in scoring, to come up with huge goals and to drive your offense, and then to ship the guy out for assets. But there is a world where that works too. And I think I was a little bit dismissive of it. And like even like the Natchez where I was like, oh, Natchez for Travis Konecny, that's crazy. But there is a world where that trade, works. I don't necessarily think Carolina is looking to add a $9 million player. They don't even want to sign Natchez for 7, right? But they are losing Jake Gensel potentially now, right, to free agency. And that doesn't mean he won't sign there, but he's obviously looking to test the market a little bit and see what he can get. And I would assume it's because Carolina is probably not, once again, doing the dollars and being stubborn with how much they want to pay. And Gensel will be arguably the best free agent available. So, I think there is a world where Travis Konecny could get traded, and you could end up with a better piece in the end. I mean, you look at the Mike Richards trade and the Jeff Carter trades, they traded a player in their prime in both instances, right? That was, not a superstar type of player, but a top line player
yeah.
and got really good assets in return. So I do think like trading for a guy like Natchez, right? I'm just using him as an example. I don't think that he's being traded to Carolina, Konecny, but a guy like in his early 20s, or let's say Trevor Zegras, right? Like
Yeah.
Trevor Zegras. And in a lot of those times, you have to add because you have the young, promising guy. In Zegras's case, he had a very down year with injuries and sitting out on the contract. I don't even know if they're really trying to trade him. But you usually want to get like what we got, right? It was let's use the Jeff Carter one, right? In comparison here, because Carter is more of a winger than a center, I guess, but he was both. Um, and a goal scorer. They got a budding star in Jake Voracek, right? They got a top 10 pick in Sean Couturier, number 8 pick in the draft. And I think they got a third round pick, if I remember correctly, on top of that,
Yep.
which I think
And
was
I
Nick
think was Nick
Cousins.
Cousins.
Nick
Yeah.
Cousins in the end. So you look at that return, it was definitely what was needed, right, for the organization. We weren't necessarily a better team with both of those. Like we didn't get better by trading Mike Richards and Jeff Carter. We got the assets that
It was
returned.
supposed to be a trade for the future, right?
Right. In those cases, they wanted a culture change. In Konechny's case, I don't think there is a drive to want a culture change
I
at
think
all.
he's a huge part of the culture.
Yeah.
Okay, so for me, I mean, the way I look at the Konechny trade is he's ultimately offensively probably your best player right now. Most teams don't trade away their best player. Let's say there's a situation where, they can't negotiate a contract. Like he's firm on 10 million. They don't want to pay him 10 million because they don't think he's worth 10 million. They want to pay him like 8.5 or 9. Okay, then you have to trade him, right? And that's the art of negotiation. You never know
Sure.
what's going to happen or what the player in their camp are going to want. So I think if it comes to that situation, that's where the Flyers end up exploring the trade because
Yeah.
they think, hey, at 10 million, it's just not worth the money. We could save that 10 million. We could trade you for somebody else and then use like that might be a little bit cheaper and then use that money elsewhere. That's kind of where I see the Flyers mindset as, where like if they can get him signed 8.59 million, even maybe like a 9.25 type of situation, I think they would be comfortable with that. I think 10 million or over though, I think that's where the Flyers probably think to themselves, hey, maybe we can spend this money on two players versus just one, and it might benefit us more. What's your thoughts, Yuri? Like, do you have the same type of like
Yeah,
mindset,
no,
thought
I
process?
I think as long as they're younger, I don't think that they're gonna bring somebody over unless it's like a swap that's like comparable in talent and they like what the player brings, but it's like the same level of player. And I was listening to like SDPN and they were talking about like Mitch Marner trades, which again I was saying earlier, I'm not convinced that he's being traded. But when I was listening to their expectations, where they brought up Konechny for Marner, they're like, oh, well, you'd have to add substantially, and I'm like, no, you don't. Like that's delusional in your mind, in my opinion, because this is why I don't think that he's going to get traded because he has such high value to that team that you probably will not get the return that you really want for this player. Because
Yeah.
typically you don't if you're in the position that they are, right? Like,
Well, and my thing, yeah, sorry, go
no,
ahead.
no, go ahead, go ahead,
I
no,
was just
go
gonna
ahead.
say my thing is like if you're gonna trade Marner for connecting the swap, like firstly, you're gonna probably want to ensure you can extend both guys. So there's gonna be extensions in place. And then that's maybe where the value comes in. But like to your point, right? Like Marner had 85 points this year. Connecting had what, 68 points, I believe.
Yeah, yeah.
So and I mean Marner
What
played
was the
69 games. Konechny, I think, played about 60 games.
76?
76 Konechny. So you had
He
68
had
plus
an he had an a 0.895 point per game. And what was Marner?
Marner's 1.23.
Okay.
So I think for Marner Konechny, like you just look at historical production, you got to probably put Konechny in first round pick maybe for the Flyers. But then you have to look at it from your situation. Like, is you adding Marner to your team and subtracting Konechny really going to be making you any better or much better?
I don't think so.
It'd be different if you could add Marner and keep Konechny, and then you have a guy to feed him. But now you're subtracting the guy that he would really be
Right.
passing to majority of the time. So like you're almost taking away one strength, adding another strength in terms of like, okay, sniper, shooter, playmaker, with Marner
Like
and Konechny.
if
I just don't know if that trade, like, how does it benefit the Flyers? Because you're getting Marner back, who's essentially the same age, maybe a little bit older, I think, than Konechny, maybe 1 year
I think
older.
he's a year older. It's the same
So
draft, maybe.
you have to sign
It's the same
Marner again
draft.
now. You have to sign Marner again. He definitely is getting 10 million. He's not
He's gonna
budging
get
off that.
above that. Yeah.
He's already making 10 million. So you're
Yeah.
gonna have to play Marner,
Let's be
who's
honest,
maybe
11 plus, right?
yeah,
11 and a half.
exactly. Who is probably maybe going to get maybe, I don't know, 15, 20, 30 points, maybe max more than Konechny if he, continues on
Not
this pace.
but not on our team.
Exactly.
Maybe on Toronto.
Exactly. So in the end, is it really worth it? And you're gonna have to pay extra assets to get him. That's why I look at
Ho-
Marner for Konechny, and I don't know if it makes a lot of sense.
I think if they really wanted like a haul back, like an excess of assets, like it would have to be a package centered around like Joel Farabee That's where
And a
you can
bunch of
get like
draft picks.
right.
Yeah.
That's where you can get like multiple prospects, Joel Farabee, a first round pick,
And
like
yeah.
without the
And,
guarantee of Farabee. But TK is a guaranteed top line player in your team.
well,
You're not going to get a haul on top of TK.
my thing too is, and this is why I also think the Marner Konechny stuff is kind of bullshit because the Leafs would be trading Marner because he's gonna be making 11 million plus. They want to relieve some of their cap woes. You adding Konechny and having to pay him 9 or 10 million, that's not relieving anything.
Well,
You
that's
just
why,
you
right.
just added another player that is basically going to be making the same, maybe a couple million less, and you're just in cap hell once again with another forward, albeit different playing style. It might fit into your, the mesh of your team a little bit better, but I don't think
Let me
it's going to help the Leafs from the cap perspective.
let
So
me ask you this: what about a package centered around Owen Tippett? Tippett,
for Marner,
yeah. What would you want to do that?
oh, 100%. Yeah, you have to be realistic. Like Tippett's what I think he got maybe 50 points or something like that this season,
Yeah.
50 something points. Let me search
Yep.
it up just to be accurate.
53, I think it was.
Let's see what Hockey DB has to say here. So he had 78 games, 53 points, and then
53. Yeah.
last season 49 points. I mean, Marner's had a plus 100 points, plus 80 points for majority of his career. So
So
yeah, you'd be stupid not to trade him.
if you refer to what I was talking about with Jeff Carter and Mike Richards, which wasn't an era where scoring was down, right? They
Yep.
were 80-point players, so you can equate that to maybe a 90 plus point player in today's era, right? You look at where Owen Tippett is, 24 years old, putting up 53 points. It's like what Jake Voracek was doing. I think there's a chance we actually lose that trade. Like, I agree with what you're saying. The value adds up, right? Because you don't have
Yeah.
a guarantee on Owen Tippett being that guy, right? So you have to give Owen Tippett, you have to give probably your number 12 pick in the draft, right?
Definitely. Yeah, maybe
And
even another like good prospect as
yeah,
well. So
exactly. And you'd have to give one of your better prospects away, which maybe would be like Oliver Bonk, right?
yeah, I
And
just think you make a good point that you might be giving up too much like cumulatively where it
like, what
ends
if
up
Owen
biting
Tippett?
you.
What if Owen Tippett becomes a 90-point player?
Well, then, I mean, you traded a guy that's gotten 90 points 3 times for another guy that's got 90
Right.
points.
But you
So it's
lost. But
really
you lost the
not that
first.
bad.
But
Yeah.
you lost a first and a high first. It's like if you look at Voracek for Jeff Carter, that's even at the end of the day. Voracek's younger, but the value wise was like pretty even. But they had to throw Sean Couturier
Yeah.
essentially on top of that. A Selke winning center
The first round
and
pick. Yeah.
a pretty good prospect who's now on a team that's twice in the Stanley Cup Finals, right? And agitating NHL, I guess bottom six forward.
Both picks at this time, though. So they're not aware, right, of
Right.
what it's
Yeah,
going to
of
be.
course. But that's kind of my point is that like it might seem like great on the surface level. And a lot of times, if that's the player you need, and yeah, maybe you do lose that in the long run with those assets, but it's worth it because you got the guy you wanted. It's not that I think that it's like a retarded trade, but
Yeah.
when you look at it retrospectively, if like Owen Tippett continues to build on what he's done and he grows again next year, which I think there's a very good chance that we're going to see that next year, like what is Owen Tippett when he's on Toronto
Yeah.
playing with, William Nylander?
True. I just think for Tippett, like, even though I think his ceiling will be 40-point guy, I don't ever think
40
his
goal.
ceiling will be, yeah, 40, sorry, yeah, 40 goal guy. But yeah, exactly. I think his ceiling is 40 goal guy. I don't think his overall point total will ever be 90
I
points. And I
don't,
think
yeah.
his will probably be like 75, 80 points, maybe point a game at the max. Um, I don't know. It'll be tough, right? Like if you got Marner in that trade or something, your benefit as the Flyers is okay. Now we have him to play with Konechny, and we have him to play with all our other, shooting
Sure.
wingers, and potentially Michkov coming in.
I,
So that's the
I
attractiveness. But
well,
there's benefits and negatives on both sides, right?
my point overall is like if Toronto really was going to trade Marner, it's going to be around a package that's and again, and you're trying to get your cap hit down. It's going to be something probably centered around a guy like Owen Tippett,
Or
right?
Farabee for your to your
Or
point. Yeah.
okay, yeah, or Trevor Zegras, right? Like a guy who's in his early 20s and it's going to be a package around that. You're not going to be getting a top line player in the NHL plus a bunch of assets. Like even the Huberto for Matthew Tkachuk trade, right? Like Matthew Tkachuk was the best player in the deal. You gave up a good defenseman and you gave up a guy who I think Florida knew, and I think Calgary knew this too, wasn't on Tkachuk's level. Whether he put up 100 points again because he's playing on Florida, wasn't able to do that with Calgary. This is my whole point. It's not like, and maybe Marner is more is I think Marner is better than Huberdeau, but it's one of those things where like they did like Calgary didn't get their value back. You know, they
Yeah.
didn't get Matthew Tkachuk back. They got assets to try to compromise that. And if you're getting Travis Konecny, like, yeah, maybe the Flyers need to add, but they're not adding a haul on top of Travis Konecny because you're getting a top line player back. Like,
Yeah.
I just feel like a lot of times people want that big fancy thing and think they have to throw the world at it. And
Yeah.
that's how you lose trades because even if you look at like the Wayne Gretzky trade for Edmonton, they won after they traded Gretzky.
Yeah,
They
exactly.
got a
With
haul back for
Messier.
that guy,
Yeah.
and that's Gretzky. Like that is a guy. Like if you want to trade for Connor McDavid, yeah, you're gonna have to. Yeah, you're that's a franchise changing player, right? I don't know if Mitch Marner is a franchise changing player. That's why I'm not 100% convinced that they're going to trade him because I'm like, what is their return? Like, what are they really getting back? Like, I heard them talking about Jose Theodore, you know, uh, or Shea Theodore, sorry, from Vegas. Great
Yeah.
defenseman, but they're like, oh, we want Shea Theodore and this other guy and this other guy. And it's like, why is Vegas going to give that to you? Because it's going to make you
Yeah.
a better team. And they don't know if they're actually a better team from that trade.
Well, yeah, because they don't, they never played with that player on their team before. To
And
your
they're
point,
gutting
I
their
mean,
depth.
I could see everybody's thinking like forward for Konechny. Oh, if they're going to trade Konechny, it's going to be a center. Like personally, I think if they trade him for a forward, it's going to probably try to be a younger guy,
It's gonna be
and
exactly.
where they might even get stuff added, right? Like if, for example, if we're looking at Zegras and you're like, well, maybe we can get Zegras with Konechny. I think probably Anaheim has to add for them to
Yes.
be able to get Konechny. So maybe that becomes interesting for the
Because
Flyers.
he's less of a guarantee.
Yeah, exactly, right. And then you bring up a great point with Theodore. I mean, we look at Vegas's defense. If you could somehow get Shea Theodore for some, Konechny package, I don't know if Vegas is interested in that, but I think the Flyers would be interested in that. So that
Sure.
could be something to
That's it.
explore,
But that's a okay, top pairing defender for a top line winger.
which makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Like that. Like I just think a lot of people throw all these assets in to just like hope that it attracts the other team. But I really think that a lot of times is a complete mistake.
Yeah, I agree. I also don't think that like if you look at draft capital and prospects, the Flyers have a lot of draft capital, a lot of prospects. Haven't traded draft picks away in a few years now. I don't necessarily think they're looking to add more draft picks. If they trade Konechny, I think they're looking to address maybe a need on the team, and those needs would be center or defense.
But
So I
let me
think
ask
if he does get traded, look to those. But yeah,
let,
go ahead, Yariv.
let me ask you this. Does that 8-year deal that would kick in next year, right? So Travis Konechny's 26 right now, I think. I'm not sure. I don't know if this is accurate actually. I always hate quant hockey because I don't know if they have the right ages. Hold on one
I
second.
got Konechny on one sec. Hockey DB, he's 27 right now. His birthday's
27.
March 11th, so he just turned 27. So he turned
Right.
28 next year.
Right. So he turns 28 next year. It kicks in at 28. So it would be until he's 36 years old. The cap is going up substantially over the next few years. So, that 8.5 million, 9 million or whatever, not let's say 9 million, we'll meet in the middle that
Yeah.
he gets, it'll be like equating to 7.5 million today down the line when he's above 30. Do you feel confident in giving a guy who will be 28 when the contract kicks in? Do you think that is a bad value? Do you consider that risky?
I don't think it's that risky because like hypothetically, if you're still getting him in his prime years, right? Like the prime for me is 27 to like 31, 32. That's when typically the best years are for a
Yeah.
player. So you're still getting a lot of that prime in there. Obviously, the risk is that, okay, by the time he's 34, 35, he might decline a bit. But I think anybody getting to that age isn't going to be the same player that they were at 28. So naturally, like for example, let's say you trade for Mitch Marner. He's a year older. You're gonna have to sign him to 8 years anyway, or whatever that's gonna be. Like you're gonna have to pay him, and he's even older. Or it could be another
I
guy
think
you
it's the
trade
same
for.
draft year.
Yeah, it could be another guy you trade for that you
Yeah,
still
it's
have to.
same draft.
Okay, so same age, right? But that's what I mean. You're gonna still have to pay that other guy you might end up trading for. Obviously, you could trade for somebody way
He's actually
younger.
young. He's actually younger than Konechny by 2 months
Okay, so
or a
obviously you
month
could
and
trade
a
for
half.
somebody younger, right? Like a Zegras or something like that. But even if you traded for Zegras, he's about to turn 24. If you sign him to an 8 year deal, he's gonna be 32 when that deal's up. I mean, he's getting into the 30s as well. I don't know. I just think like you can't navigate that way where you're like, well, he's going to be 35 at some point. Every player in the league is going to be 35 at
Right.
some point. He's one of your best players. I think you have to live with the fact that hey, there's a chance that anything could happen. He could decline, but if you look at it from season to season, he's only gotten better every year. So what's pointing to him declining at
Yeah.
this
What
at this junction?
And what do people think is going to happen in free agency when you want that big free agent player who's 28 years old?
You're gonna have to
That's
pay him a bunch of money
you're going to
and
have
give
to
him
give
big
him a
term.
eight-year deal and a free agent market on top of that, and that's how you get like James Van Riemsdyk $7.5 million a year contract for a guy who's worth 6 million a year, right?
Yeah.
It's like I completely agree with what you said. Like yes, there is risk in the second half of that contract, but it's like you cannot operate being afraid that way. I like I feel like you have to operate would be like you hold on to your best players, the guys who you believe can help bring you a cup there,
Yeah.
and you build around them. And you build it
Yeah.
right with a combination of young guys and veterans and knowing
Well,
that you have young guys coming that will help balance out those higher contracts.
I just look at Marchand, like that's Konechny's comparable for me. And I mean, he had some of his best seasons over 30. Like he's 36 right now. And Marchand had his best season of 100 points literally at age 30. 100 points at age 30. And then I think actually his most productive years have come after 30. He had 100 points, 87 points. Um,
Playing
exactly.
with,
So really good players
yeah,
in Marchand or in Pasternak and Bergeron,
yeah,
which I mean, Konechny doesn't have the luxury of him right now, but if you put him with really good players, I think he'll produce. So I just think you can't go about it that way and say, hey, well, we have to trade him because at age 34, he's definitely going to be shit. Like
yeah.
there's
I,
no guarantee
and
that that's going to be the
I think
case.
people
So
are worried that it's going to be like a Brendan Gallagher situation, but Gallagher was never even on Konechny's level. Like he was a good player, in his prime, but he's not
he
a
never had
player.
the same dynamism to his
Right.
game and the same
He had the
speed in my mind.
right.
So
Or the shot. He had like the rough and tumble element, but that's why we use Marchand as the comparison
yeah.
because Konechny plays like Brad Marchand, right? So
Yeah. I mean, exactly. Like I can't
I
sum it up any better than that,
yeah.
really.
Well, I think the most important thing you said is that you can't be afraid. You can't run your team afraid.
Based off something that might happen 7 years from now or 6 years
Right.
from now. You have to factor in, okay, let's say his career's over in 6 years. So that means that would be what, 34 years old, and there's 2 years left on the contract, taking him to 36. At that point, how much would the cap have gone up?
Yeah.
Like
And it-
how like you could probably trade him. Like you never know what's out there at the current time, so you can't operate, now based on what you think the future is going to be because you have no idea what that future holds. So I think
right.
it's naive to do it that way, in my
Yeah.
opinion.
I think you have to keep him to a number. Look, if Konechny refuses to move off the $10 million thing, then yeah, maybe you do have to trade him because he financially doesn't fit in the
Yeah, I
organization.
don't think he is a $10 million player. Like you look at the production that he's put up,
He
he's not
can't
worth
make
10
that.
million.
Yeah, he can't make that argument, right?
Exactly.
Like a Marner who has a history of breaking 100. You know what I mean? He can make that argument right now.
Exactly.
Like, let's say the Flyers don't sign Konechny, and this is why I think they do want to lock him up. And the Flyers are better next year, and Konechny puts up 90 points, right? Like, then you have to pay him.
10
Probably
million.
you have to pay him that 10 million. So I think that's why they would be incentivized to get that deal done now. I just like what you said is that you cannot you cannot operate with a fear mentality that, oh, we're Philadelphia and everything will break on us. And I feel like
Yeah.
that's where a lot of this comes from.
Well, the contract could age super well. Like people can point at it and say, "Oh, well, Konecny's had injuries the last couple of years," but I've never heard of him having any major surgery, any major bone breaks or fractures.
He
Like
has
he's been
missed some
pretty,
time though
yeah,
to injuries.
but he it hasn't been anything serious where like
Yeah.
this guy's gotten season-ending injuries, season-ending surgeries. Like he's been pretty durable throughout most of his career.
We
So just
did
to
we
think,
did have that with Couturier though.
well, yeah, exactly, right. He was durable too, and then had the big
By devil's
injuries.
advocate,
You
yeah.
never know when it's gonna happen, but I just think like you can't operate based off what ifs. To this point, he's
Right.
been, but healthy. He's improved every
Exactly.
year. I think for sure if he's asking 10 million, it's ludicrous based on what he's done. But if you can get him 8.59 million, he's your best player. You're just gonna let your best player walk. What does that speak? What does that say to the rest of the team if you do that? So.
Yeah. I guess it depends on the return too.
Obviously, yeah. I mean, if you get a really great trade back for him and you think you're fleecing the other team and you actually do fleece them, then it makes a ton of sense. But I just don't know if that trade's out there. So,
Right. And it's not going to be like, I'm not tempted by a package with like Peyton Krebs and Michael Samuelson. It's like, okay, those are to fill out my roster. I don't need to do that. I have all
yeah.
those assets internally. It would only make sense to do it if it gives us something we really need. And that's why I bring it the Mitch Marner thing. I know we would have to add in that scenario, but it gets us at least a high end playmaker that you cannot easily find around the league. But then you also have to weigh what you're losing, and what you're doing. And it's just like, I don't know. I just feel like people are kind of putting Flyers management between a rock and a hard place where it's like, you want high end talent, you have one of them, but you want to trade that one and start over. So magically, it all lines up together. But we know that draft picks are not a guarantee at high end assets. Like, how many people thought that Provorov would end up, like I did? I thought Provorov would be a number one defenseman. Right now, he has not proven to be that. How many of these guys that we drafted, Patrick, there's so many guys that we drafted that just did not work out to the extent. And like, Simone Gagne is my favorite player, right? He was never the best player in the league. Not he wasn't even close. He was at one point maybe one of the best goal scorers in the league, but it really took Peter Forsberg to get here to even manifest that 40 goals, right? He was the 30 goal scorer until Peter Forsberg got here. Um, so I just feel like people really need to just be like, what if we got rid of Simone Gagne and then we wanted to bring Peter Forsberg over and then Forsberg didn't have Gagne to play with him to make that amazing line? It's like, that's how I kind of think of it, is like, we found one great asset here that is not easily replaceable around the league. It's not easy to find a Travis Konecny. It's really not. I think people are like
Yeah,
disillusioned.
the way he plays is rare, right? Like you don't see a lot of guys with the same tenacity that he
That,
brings. So,
but also that can lead your team in scoring when the team has trouble scoring
yeah, exactly.
without an elite playmaker involved, with the number one center coming back from 2 years of back surgery. And the best players offensively he has to play with are Morgan Frost, Joel Farabee, and Owen Tippett, who are all 23, 24 years old entering the season. Like, it's not like he has another Travis Konecny to play with. He didn't
Yeah,
have that. So it's just like,
yeah.
I just think that it's rare to find these type of players, and to assume that you're going to move on to other assets and you're going to easily find them. You know, Again, there are scenarios where I would be okay with the trade, right? Like if Trevor Zegras package was coming the other way, but then I'll leave the person out of it. But we were talking about this prior to recording that, we're listening to a podcaster I like, and he was like, "Oh, with Travis Connecting can't get you Trevor Zegras, then why the hell would I make that trade? In what world is Trevor Zegras worth more to me than Travis Konecny? Like, a guy who put up half a point a game last year and is dynamic, but has yet to prove anything in the league either. Just because he's on the cover of NHL doesn't mean it manifests on the ice in the same impact that Travis Konecny is making for my team. It's just, I don't know. Like, does Trevor Zegras put up the same amount of production on our team that he did? Maybe. I just don't know. I just feel like everybody assumes that everything's so
It's a lot of question
transferable.
marks for
Right.
sure. Yeah.
It's more question marks than people really want to admit. It's like the name almost matters more to people. Like, who thought Carter Verhaeghe was going to be what he is? He was not a name. Jonathan Marchessault, who's given away. Like I'm so sick of just jumping off of names. And the same thing with Mitch Marner. Like I wanted to draft Mitch Marner. I was hoping he would fall to the Flyers. It's not that I don't like him, but I'm also not going to jump for a name. I want to win trades. I want to build the best team I can. And I don't want to spend a bunch of assets. I don't want to be Chuck Fletcher again. I don't want Rasmus Ristolainen because of the name and the reputation and to move on from Ghost and to lose assets in that and to move a mid-round, first-round pick, plus other assets and a second, all it to like I don't want to make trades that way. And I feel like that's most of what I see online is like, well, I'll
Well,
move
that's what
anything
you
I
get
have
on
to
Twitter,
get the
right?
I'll move anything I have to get
Oh,
this player that I want. And I'm like,
yeah.
I don't have that attitude. Okay. Let's do a quick break. I'll move the next segment down and we'll do like a whole draft prospect thing together. So just want to
Yeah.
remind everybody, please like and subscribe. Oh, we did have this thing here about we talked enough about trades. Um, so I just remind everybody, please like, subscribe to our YouTube channel, hit the notification bell for notifications, follow us on iTunes and Spotify, and give us a rating there if you can. That is a tremendous help to us. Okay. So the next thing I wanted to talk about was um, McKean's hockey. They they do draft like prospects, profiles, rankings. They're they get taken pretty seriously. They're, I guess, one of the top around the world. Very well known. They have been ranking prospect systems for organizations, and they rank the Flyers at 17th overall in the league. And their top 10, they obviously have Michkov at 1. They have Oliver Bonka 2. They have Emil Andre at 3. They have 4. They have Ronnie Attard. 5. They have Carson Bjarnason. 6. They have Denver Barkey. 7. They have Alexei Kolosov. 8. They have Samu Tuomala. 9. They have Elliot Denoyer. And 10. They have Carter Southern. And the reason I wanted to bring this up, and I don't really want to knock McKean's hockey because I'm not going to shit talk them. And I was actually going to write this to them, and I tend to not write anything online. Like I'll write it out and just delete it. But if you can't even get the rankings of our players right on an internal, because like I look at that list of the prospect rankings and I'm like, yeah, I
Yeah,
don't agree with
Barkey's higher than Bjarnason, and Kolosov's probably higher than
yeah, like
Bjarnason. And
yeah, and where's
yeah, I don't know.
Vragan on this list?
Yeah.
Um, and I don't think Ronnie Attard is our fourth best
I don't
prospect.
even think he is really a prospect, maybe even at this point. He's like
R-
25, so
right. I look at this list and I'm like, how confident. This is why I wrapped it around the whole draft talk thing. It's like,
how confident are you in these rankings and these
well,
projections and everything that people are
I,
putting out, right?
I just wonder how often they actually watch some of these players because it's so hard to actually watch and keep track of all of these
Oh
players. Like I
man.
remember Steve got ripped for a ranking that he made of our internal prospects, and he had like players on there that nobody agreed with, and people were like bashing him and stuff. But he was going off of like what he saw these guys when they were in college or
Yeah, well,
in
you don't want to
juniors.
lie, right? You want to give some real perspective based on
Right.
just
Like,
being like, well, this is what everybody else thinks, so let me just fucking do it and put it
right.
there.
And, I look at this overall 17th ranking and I'm like, the Flyers were ranked number one at one point by sites, and none of that manifested the way these people thought that it
Yeah.
would. And like nobody knew Wyatt Johnson was going to be who he is. And I just don't take these too seriously.
It's a crapshoot, man, with these young guys,
Yeah.
especially.
And that's kind of the whole thing is like, I just really question how accurate this is. And it makes me think about the upcoming draft and how we shouldn't get like, and I'm guilty of this as well, but we shouldn't get too wrapped up in what the projections are of,
Yeah.
Corey Proneman and
Or the mocks or everything.
right. It's like a lot of these guys are not accurate. Like majority of the stuff
But
they
it's also
say
just
does
like,
not end up manifesting the way that they say it.
yeah, and it's like you said, right? These guys that are covering and doing these mock drafts and doing these prospect profiles, like I'm sure they're watching a lot of the best teams, a lot of the best prospects. They saw maybe some of these guys for 1 or 2 games throughout the season. But how can you really make an assessment on a player and what he might be by just watching 1 or 2 games? So I look at these, I just say, hey, like if you want to learn about these prospects, maybe learn a few things about them. It's a great knowledge base, great thing to look at, like as a tool to kind of learn about some of these guys you might not be
Sure, yeah.
aware of. But in terms of it being accurate and how much of these guys have these, prospect analysts and mock draft and people making these mock drafts actually watched, I'd be surprised if they watched a lot. Like, to be honest, they probably not. I don't want to talk. I don't want to say they're full of shit, but like,
It feels like that sometimes.
yeah,
Yes.
it can feel that way where it's just like, did you really watch, whoever did this ranking of all these, 30 teams, did they really go in and watch every single prospect from all 32 teams and, can accurately write about them and, put up a ranking? Like there's some situations where they're just putting it together and like making a guess, right? Like that's just
Yeah.
what it is. It's a
Like how do
guess
you,
at the end of the day.
like I like Bjarnason. Don't get me wrong. I've not given up on this guy at all, but how do you have Bjarnason higher on the list than Zavragan after last season?
You don't if you watch the games, which
Like,
shows to me that he didn't watch the games. So,
yeah.
you know.
And outside of Michkov, there are no, I guess Kolosov is on here. Um, I don't know how you have Kolosov below Bjarnason. Like,
Yeah,
I
that's what I
don't,
mean.
it just, I'm like looking at what you're doing and I'm like, yeah, this isn't accurate. And it makes me question myself too. It's I don't even want to shit on these people and saying that they didn't watch them. It's just it shows how difficult this really is to do, to
Yeah,
rank
exactly.
players and to know them well,
But everyone has their own
intimately.
opinion, right? Like everyone has their own viewpoint, own opinion. I could watch a guy play for 20 minutes and be like, "Holy shit, this guy's the best guy ever." And then somebody else could watch him and say, "Well, he stinks." It's like watching a movie, right? Like think about it. You could watch a really great movie yourself and think it's really great. You could tell your buddy, "Oh, you should watch this. It's a great movie." Your buddy watches it. He's like, "I thought it was a fucking shit movie," right? Like it's the same thing with the prospect. You could watch him play. Look how he took those edges. Look at his skating. Look at this. Somebody else could watch him and not see any of that. So I think it's really like something that you have to take with a grain of salt in the sense that everybody has their own way of assessing things and evaluating people. So your way of evaluating somebody might be completely different from somebody else's, and that could completely change a ranking or a prospect
Yeah.
profile or all those types of
And
things. So
and there's also these like late season risers where like sometimes it can work, sometimes it doesn't work.
it's
Like,
better to take the full sample size,
well,
right?
for instance, Nico Heishier, right? Like clearly worked, right? Because he was a late season riser.
Mm-hmm.
But he wasn't the best player in that draft. And neither was Patrick, right? For us taking him, like Kale McCarr was, right? Who was
And Pedersen's
highly
probably better than those other two as well. So
highly touted, but he was questioned
yeah.
severely. Um, and then you look at Jesse, not Jesse, yeah, was it Pugliarvi?
Yeah, Pulley Edmonton's
Yeah,
pick, right?
right. Had a big world tournament, didn't end up being much. Got taken third overall. Like
Yep. Looking
it,
like a Slavkovsky, right? Like he had that big world championships, and
yeah.
Montreal fans are kind of concerned about his you know, development. So who knows, right? I think at
Well,
least for
he had a really
prospects.
good second half. I will say
No,
that.
definitely did, yeah. But so who knows where it's gonna go? But I just mean like I think for prospects, it's always better to look at the bigger sample size and the smaller sample
Hmm.
size. Anybody could produce potentially in like you know 20 points in 20 games, but what is he doing in 60 games? Is it 20 points in 60 games, right? So like I think the full overarching view is a better way to go about judging versus well look at how they did on this stage that was so much pressure. I mean, he could have had the best 5 games of his life at the World Championships, and then after that he might not be that great. So
Yeah.
I think it's a risk always when you use the tournaments and things like that.
I think it's also why comparables, like comparing players and ranking them is
Oh,
I
that's
understand
tough.
why it happens. It's entertaining and it makes sense. It's digestible media, but how it's not really a good way. And this is what I talk about with the Flyers drafting is like we don't need to get the best player in the draft. We need to hit the right players.
You need to
Right?
get
Like
the
I don't
player
know.
that's for your system, your team, right?
Yeah, like Wyatt Johnson had a great year this year. I don't know if he's actually the best player from that draft, but they hit big time on him. Him and Robertson, right? Like
Yep.
doesn't matter if they're the best players in the draft. It matters that they hit. That individually they looked at those players, they liked what they saw, and they took the right player for them, right? And they developed those players properly. And I feel like that's really the mentality you should go into the draft with is like Not that, oh, Cole Eiserman was the highest ranked guy on the list, and that's the guy we needed at that time. Sometimes, like look at the Cam York Cole Caulfield trade. Again, this is when I made that video. I think this is before you joined the podcast, but I made a video talking about like apples and oranges, guys. Like, doesn't matter if Cole Caulfield ends up being a great player. He probably will, but we need to hit on the guy we took, right? And I feel like that's the attitude we should have in this draft. Is like whoever we take at 12, whoever we take at 31 and 32, like those picks need to hit. And the reason I was thinking about this is I was thinking about Consta Hellenius, who's a guy who is highly touted and has been, I've seen him as high as like top five and
I feel
as
like his
low.
stock's been falling lately.
Right, because he's not a flashy player, but then you look at his actual production against men, and he's like
Yeah,
one of the best all time in Liga for a guy his age, like up there with star players in the
that's what I mean,
NHL.
right?
So it's like, how does that guy develop, and why? How is he putting up what he's putting, and like
Yeah.
he's being
And
downgraded,
is he closer to being NHL ready because he's already playing against men? You got to factor that in
and you can bring
too.
him. You can also bring him over to the AHL with zero risk because he's
Yeah.
European.
So I think this is perfect, Yariv, to get into the draft talk. Like
Yeah,
we talked about it, I mean, a couple weeks before on who we thought the Flyers might pick and who we would pick. So obviously we can go number 12 first, then talk about 31, 32 a bit after.
yeah, go
But
for it.
who do you think, at least for the Flyers, number 12, like who are you kind of circling? Who are you thinking they might select?
So I'm still hoping for similar. I ideally my number one pick is Berkeley Cadden.
Yeah.
He's the guy
Okay.
I'm really really hoping makes it. I've seen Caden Lidstrom make it pretty far down. That's another guy I would be interested in, like a big centerman with scoring upside and size. But like Constantinius kind of scared me off. Now I'm like a lot more warmed up to him. Obviously, Tej Ginla, Zane Perek, I'd be really open to him too. I guess the guys that confuse me because I don't know enough about them are like Michael Branzig Nygaard,
Yeah.
who is a young centerman with like upside, and like Beckett Seneca. Like I looked at his production and it didn't really increase from last year to this year substantially, and I'm kind of like I'm more hesitant of those type of guys. And they're like, oh, he had a strong playoff. I'm like, yeah, I don't really care. Patrick was an MVP in his playoff year. Like, I don't care about like a 2 week thing where the guy stepped up. Like, that's great, but I want the guy long term who's consistently progressing upward. Um, I'm still would be excited. Yeah, Yakimchuk, I think would be a really interesting pick just because of the physicality,
Mhm.
and the tenaciousness with the scoring upside. Um, I haven't really figured it out, dude. I've been like
It's
trying.
tough. I feel like there's a lot of, I don't know, I feel like where the Flyers are sitting, there's a lot of interesting guys that are available and that might
Right.
be available in that range. There's a ton of guys that like might be dropping, might be rising. I think it's really
I
hard with
think
this
D will
draft
go
to,
first. You don't think so?
yeah, it could be for sure. I think this is one of those drafts where we're not going to know how it falls really until it happens because I've seen guys, mocked as high as 5 that are then mocked in other drafts by other people like number 12, number 13. So I don't really know what it's going to be. I think it's going to be all over the place, which will make it for a fun draft, right? But when we talked a couple weeks ago, like the big thing was Cole Eiserman's dropping. Cole Eiserman's dropping. Should the Flyers take him? I still think with his goal scoring potential, if he's around, the Flyers, would be a good pick to select him. You could say maybe redundant skill set, but hey, if his bottom is he can
Not in
score
our
30
system.
goals, yeah, exactly, right? If his bottom is 30 goals and his ceiling is like 50 goal player, I think at that range, you got to select him if he's still around. So Eiserman would be one for me for sure. One guy I've really warmed up to is Hellenius. I've done a
Yeah.
little bit of research just
Interesting,
on
right?
just on his play and just watching him, and he seems like a calm player in a sense. Like he's always
Yes.
really smart hockey IQ, knows where to be. Not like flashy per se, but still has skill and still produce really well in the Liga, like you said. So I would definitely not be against him taking Hellenius. I think it really fills a need for them, and I think he's I don't want to say Barkov like because I think Barkov's a little more
Maybe
skillful, but
Lundell.
yeah, it could be something like that. But I do see flashes in the sense of Barkov where like he can be really, really good defensively, and also still does have offensive upside. So
Maybe
I don't think it would be a bad pick.
maybe Oliver
Definitely.
Ekman Ek, like
Yeah, or
comparable.
Joel Eriksson Ek, yeah.
Joel Eriksson Ek, Oliver
Yeah.
Ekman.
Oliver Ekman Larson, that's
Yeah,
okay.
combine the names.
All these Swedish,
Uh,
Finnish guys sound the
yeah,
same. No worries.
yeah.
But yeah, so I think Hellenius would be really interesting for me. And then I'm on defense. I'm kind of warming up more to Sam Dickinson. I
Yeah.
really
I
like
don't
his
think he'll make
offensive
it,
production.
but
I don't
yeah,
know if he'll make it, but I wonder if the Flyers are like, hey, is it worth it to trade up and select him? Because he's been playing with Oliver Bonk, and then we kind of have that in-house pairing that's kind of developing together with the Knights. I think that would be the interest from the Flyers there. I do have a tweet as well
sure.
that was regarding Anthony Sanfilippo. So he was hearing that the Flyers scouted Consta Hellenius pretty well,
Yeah.
and also knows that they like Cole Eiserman, and might move up a couple spots to try to grab Eiserman because he's specifically heard that Buffalo really likes him too, and they're picking 11, so they might take him at 11th if he's still around.
Okay.
Something interesting. But Sanfilippo said he expects Briere to be very active at the draft, so
Yeah.
something to keep an eye on. But I think for the Flyers, like, to me, there seems to be a handful of guys where like I don't think I would be very disappointed with them taking, Hellenius, Eiserman, Dickinson, Zeev Boyum, like Yakimchuk, even Berkeley Catton, I didn't even mention, but I would really be ecstatic with him as well. So I
Yeah.
think there's a bunch of guys with the potential to fall to them. So it's going to be an interesting draft, but it looks like they're going to get and come away with a good player. Like I feel like where they're selecting, a couple picks after is where it really starts to drop off. Whereas the Flyers are going to still be able to kind of select in that upper tier range in the
Yeah.
first round.
And I feel like there's always a surprise or two in the top 15 that ends
Definitely,
up
yeah.
dropping a guy. But again, this is kind of what I go back to what I was saying. I was like, don't get too wrapped up in like, oh, well, Eiserman might end up being better than Hellenius. But is Hellenius going to be a top six forward in the league? And is he going to hit? Like,
And
is
he's going to
he
fill a need for you
yeah,
too.
and is he going to
So,
be a high value piece to your organization? That's
yeah.
what you have to walk away with. More than am I taking the best player in the draft? Because odds are you're not taking the best player in the draft at 12. I mean,
Yeah.
potentially it's always possible, but like, will this guy hit for us? And I feel like don't overthink it too much. Like, grab the guy who has a high ceiling and a high floor and make sure that he is your guy. Like, and Hellenius, again, he's not a similar type of player, but could it be a Mike Richards for us? Like, Mike Richards was not the best player from his draft. In fact, that draft was incredible in 2003
One of
draft.
the best drafts ever. Yeah.
But we hit both picks. Jeff Carter,
Yeah.
Mike Richards, 11 and 24. I think it was
Yeah.
24.
Yeah. Something like that. You have to, for the Flyers hope, right? Like you're selecting 12th and then 31st or 32nd. So obviously with Florida making the Stanley Cup finals here, the Flyers officially are either going to select 31st, 32nd. Depends on if they, the Panthers win the cup or not. Um, but yeah, so we can kind of get into that.
Yeah,
Like
have you looked
if you,
into that?
a little bit, just a little research, and we can
Same.
kind of mention a couple people, but I think to your point, right? Like if you're the Flyers, you have two picks in the first round, and you hit on those two picks, it's going to be a huge impact on rebuilding the team and kind of putting a more competitive product on the ice in the years to come. So I think obviously it's in their best interest to try to hit on these picks, not really reach for guys. If they don't think that they are going to have, an NHL floor, for example. But one guy I've noticed and was really high in rankings to start the season and a lot of mock is Aaron Kiviharu. I'm not sure how to pronounce his name.
Haru, yeah.
Yeah, but he plays for HIFK in Liga as well. And he was top 10 ranked essentially until he had a season-ending injury. So I always find players like that interesting, where it's like, so he got injured, but before his injury, he's one of the best players talent-wise and production-wise. So for the Flyers, it'd be a no-brainer, I think, to take him at 31st or 32nd if he's still around.
Yeah, I think that would be a really interesting pick. I mean, I've heard the name Emery kind of thrown around. I would hope that like that guy Seneca, like I don't think he'll be available, but like a Jet Luchenko, which Button had us taking him at 12.
That might be the
Like
second
maybe
pick. Yeah.
right, like maybe something like that hopefully would fall to us, or Sasha
I'm seeing him
Boyer.
mocked. I'm seeing him mocked, right? Lachenko like 29, 28, 31,
Yeah.
32. So
Yeah.
maybe if the Flyers are interested, like Lachenko's one. I think Kiviharju. To your point, I think Sasha Boyer, I'm seeing him like in the 20s and things like that. I think that would be a really under the radar type pick if they could get him. I know Steve was really, really high on him. Maybe that's a guy the Flyers are like, hey, like if they see him around 26, 27, maybe they try to package, one of those second round picks to try to move up and grab him if they really like him. I
Yeah.
think that would be interesting for sure.
Yeah. I think it's possible, and I'll be honest, I don't see the Flyers moving up from 12. I just think the cost of it is too high.
I think the second pick, moving up with the second pick,
Yeah.
might be
And
something that might happen, like
and
depending if somebody falls they really like,
well,
right?
typically I feel like when you do that, like that, like let's say they move the 32nd, and what's our guaranteed second round
From
pick?
Columbus, I think, right?
No, the other one.
Uh it escapes me,
Hold
but it's
on,
like
hold on
50,
one
it'll be
second.
like 50 something, I think.
Is it Colum? No, it's higher. It's the 19th pick. It'd be 40. Yeah, you're right. It's 51. It'd
Yeah.
be 51st pick in the draft. So I think maybe there's a chance that the Flyers might swap seconds. Like
Maybe,
they'll
yeah.
take a later second from a team, then they get to pick higher up in the second round, and they move up like one or two spots to grab the guy. Like that I could see happening, but I don't see any kind of substantial move up in the draft because the draft is about your odds. And I feel like the odds are hard. Unless there's, I guess there's, if there's a guy like you're like really high on him, somebody you didn't expect, like when Travis Konecny fell.
That's what I mean. You
Um,
never know what's gonna happen, right? So
right. Like, yeah, it could happen. I just think it's unlikely. And I think it's unlikely that the Flyers, with all of those names like that we mentioned, with, Hellenius and Iserman and, Berkeley Catton and, we could go on and on. Yakimchuk, all these guys who fall, just the sheer number of them fall beyond
yep,
14.
yep.
I can't see the Flyers giving up a second round pick just to take Iserman over Hellenius. Let's just say that. As long as one of their guys from their list is available, I think they stick.
Yeah,
Um,
I think that makes a ton of sense, right? Because
maybe
ultimately they're all very similar, right? In upside, a lot of these guys in this
yeah.
range. So
Like if the fact they didn't do it for Michkov, who would easily have been worth even moving up, like trading your second first round pick. But
yep,
imagine like the Flyers did that last year, right? And they didn't get Bonk in the end, and they only got Michkov because they had to trade their second first round pick to move up to, let's say, fifth,
yeah, it's
right?
not the best asset management, obviously.
Right. And that's why I feel like they'd much want to end up with two first round picks than one,
Yeah,
hoping that that guy ends up being a star. Because if you look retrospectively at most drafts, typically, after top three, it's a crapshoot.
yeah,
You only know that those guys are going to be NHL players. You don't know to what degree of NHL player they will be. So I just think it's really important that the Flyers make both of these picks and hit. And I don't even have that strong of an opinion. I have my favorites, and if they grab one of those guys, great. But you know what I think when I see that though, Vasily, it's like, oh great, I understood what I thought was right because the Flyers validated it. Not,
yeah,
you know what I mean? Because like it's like when we took Cam York again. When we took Cam York, nobody was really thinking about York over Caulfield, right? But at the end of the day, that was a really good draft pick by the Flyers. That was a mid first round pick where they got a top pairing defenseman. Like forget Cole Caulfield. Did they hit the pick? They
yeah.
hit
They
the
did
pick.
exactly.
And I feel like that's what I want to walk away with is
Well,
they
you just
hit.
don't you want them to hit on these two picks because that adds two, potential roster players that are going to be contributing for years to come to this team, right? If you don't
Yeah.
hit the picks, you're losing out on that. So
Yeah.
that's what you got to hope for. But I think there's going to be a chance for the Flyers to grab, a good player at 12, definitely, and
Yeah.
then depending on the second pick, we'll see who's around. But that'll be interesting to see kind of what happens at the draft. It's coming up quick. I think the next couple episodes, I'm gonna try to at least research a bit more. We can get
Well,
even deeper into the draft
we
talk.
only have one episode till Steve comes on.
I know we're really getting into it, so I gotta
Yeah.
brush up here.
For those who not don't remember or maybe didn't listen this to some of the other episodes, we will be having Steve Cornianos on June 18th to talk about a pre-draft, and you'll have that for the entire week leading up to the draft. And then or I guess week and a half. And then we're gonna do an episode a couple days after. Again, Vasili will be on site at the draft, so we'll have that coverage as well. So we're gonna do like a whole. It's gonna be like 3 weeks of nonstop draft talk essentially on this podcast. So I'm really looking forward to that. That's gonna be super fun. It's gonna be great because we're not gonna have to guess as much. Because we'll
Yeah.
have Steve there to who's actually watched the players. And again, he'll tell you himself, like it's impossible to be 100% accurate with any of these picks or players or to know exactly where they're coming from. Sometimes some take longer than
Yeah.
others, but
That's why it's sports, right? Like if anybody knew everything, they wouldn't be watching. So
yeah,
that's my perspective on
yeah.
it.
And that's why I don't care about prospect rankings anymore. And I used to. I used to like really care. I used to like, but why'd you rank us at 17? Now I look at it and I just go, eh. Because I'm like, I don't really care if
It's
you
just
think
somebody's opinion, really,
right.
at the end of the day.
You
So
see it all the time where like it's just really hard to know if a player is going to be a superstar. That's why I'm so excited about
especially at
Michkov.
age 18,
Yes.
too, right? Like it's hard to tell at that age. They're so
Yes.
young.
Yes. The fact that we know Michkov is at least the top six forward in the league at 19 years old. Like,
That's a
come
win.
on.
It's a big win. Yeah.
How many people knew that Tyson Forrester would be what he is?
No.
Nobody
Yeah.
even
It's even
had
more of a
him as a
question
two-way
mark.
player.
Exactly.
He wasn't even considered a two-way player at all. He was considered a one-dimensional big shot player. Like big time shooter with size.
That's what I
Like
mean.
John LeClaire, and he's not John LeClaire. He's Mark Stone. How the hell are you gonna know that when he's
Well, it
18
just
years
shows,
old?
right? Like you really got to watch these guys in depth and their little habits to really know what type of player they are. And a lot of the time, it's hard to do that with how many players are getting drafted and selected, like hundreds of players in this upcoming draft. So
Right.
it's hard to do it, right?
Yes. And it seems like this draft is not a weak draft. It's an average draft
Yeah, exactly.
with certain strengths. And that's why I think D is going to get taken first because D is something every team is looking for. So like I don't expect the Boyum to be available, even though I would love him at 12. But I think all the D men are going to push the forwards down. And I think that's why Salayev is so high on the list. You know, oh, there is another guy before we move on that I do want to talk about. Let me look up his name because he's really interesting to me, and I don't know exactly what to do with this guy. And I would love to talk to him. Here he is, Dean uh, Letonru. Letonru.
Okay.
He plays AAA under 18 AAA hockey. Uh, he's 6'7", 209 pounds at 17 years old. He's a center, dominating his league. He's got 61 goals, 66 assists in 56 games. Again, he's
Yeah.
playing high school level hockey here. You know, he's playing AAA. He's not playing in the OHL, so the competition is not the same. But I do think about that was the case with Cale Makar, which is why nobody knew he was going to go first overall, or why he should have, and nobody really knew that because of his level of competition. He was playing like prep
Yeah.
school.
Where's this guy ranked, Yariv? Like, is he ranked
Um,
anywhere?
so if you go to Tankathon, he's ranked 38. I've seen him ranked as high as 30,
Okay,
29.
interesting. I
Um,
wonder, I mean, some team's going to take a swing on him. He'll definitely be one of those project type players. My only, because he sounds interesting, right? You never know with those big guys. If they really put it all together, it could be a force. My only caveat with a big guy like that
is he
uh,
dominating because of his size?
yeah, is he dominating AAA because he's
That's what I
six
was
seven and
thinking.
everybody else is 6'1" and like, well, what are you supposed to do? He's just gonna push you off the puck, right? So
And in the
that's my
NHL,
only
that won't
thought.
be as much of a
Is
factor. I mean, it still
yeah,
is. It's still a factor, and that's probably why he's not ranked higher. It
exactly.
is
Yeah.
probably because of that. But he
Other
is,
teams are probably thinking of that, right? Like, well,
yeah.
while this kid's beating up on kids his age, once he gets here, it's
I,
not going to be the same,
I'll tell
right?
you, if we take like a Berkeley Catton at 12, who's like an undersized, highly skilled player, I'd be pretty open to taking a guy like this. But then I think about like
Balance it a bit. Yeah.
Isaac Ratcliffe, right? Who was a 6'6", goal scorer, still not playing in the NHL. You know, it's
Yeah,
like
I
I
think
don't want another one of those.
with the bigger guys, it could be a risk. I think if he was in the OHL, it'd be less of a risk. But the fact that he's even lower than that, it's like, who knows, right?
Right. But he
So we'll
is
see.
annihilating it.
Oh yeah, he's doing really
He's got
well.
above a goal a game. He's got 127 points, 56 games.
It's
Like,
pretty nuts. Yeah,
yeah,
he's
it's
definitely way too good for that level. That's for
yeah.
sure.
He's got more than 2 points a game.
But that would
So
be a guy that's years out, right? Like big projects. So it'd be more like of a wait and see. But
yes.
hey, I mean, if you get the guys that you're looking for with your first two picks and you hit on them and you're like, hey, these are the guys we wanted, then I think why not take a swing with your second round pick?
But if he
So
turns into Tage Thompson,
it
that's
looks like a genius move. Yeah.
you take a Tage Thompson at 30th overall or
Pretty
whatever.
great value. Yep.
It's phenomenal. Again, like what this team would do with the top 6 forward who's 6'7". I mean, forget about it. What he would do, how our fan base would react to that.
Oh my God. Yeah. Be
You know what I
second coming
mean?
of Lindros,
Oh my
basically.
God. And they would put that on him too. Poor guy.
Pretty much. But
Yeah.
it'd be some great marketing for sure. They
Yeah.
probably have him doing commercials with Lindros himself or
Yeah.
something like that.
But yeah, I have no idea what we're gonna do. But
But
I
it's gonna be
do,
fun. It's gonna be a fun time with the draft, always
yeah,
is, right?
I do trust Flair. I will say that after the
He's
pet.
been I think we're gonna look back to be honest in like his tenure of drafting and he selected a lot of guys that look like they're earmarked for the NHL. Like whether or not they're impact guys or what have you, if you are selecting a player in the draft and they make it to the NHL, that is a win. So
So real quick before we move on, because this is kind of interesting to me.
yeah.
What year did he show up? 2017?
When Fletcher got hired, he
No,
is a package.
2018.
Yeah,
18
so when
fair be
Fletcher
draft.
got hired, right?
No, not fair be draft. Sorry.
So yeah,
$2019.
whenever Chuck Fletcher got hired, that's when Flair would have been
So
hired as
so
well.
this is the list of players he's taken. Cam
Yeah.
York, Bobby Brink, Ronnie Attard, Mason Millman, Igor Serduk, who we haven't seen, Roddy Ross, Bryce Brzezinski, Tyson Forrester, Emil Andre, Zayd Wisdom, Elliot
Yeah.
Denoye, Connor McLennan, Samu Tuamala, Alexei Kolosov, Brian
Yeah.
Zanetti, Murchison, Ethan Sansom, Owen McClellan, Cutter Gauthier, Devin Kaplan, Alex Bump, Hunter McDonald, Santeri Silku, Alexis Gendron, and then last year, Matvey Michkov, Oliver Bonk, Carson Bjarnason, Igor Zavragin, Denver Barkey, Cole Knubel, Alex Yernick, Carter Sutherland, Ryan McPherson, and Mateo Mann. So not perfect by any
No,
stretch,
but
but
nobody's is, right? Like look
but
league wide. So
let's just look at the top picks. Cam York hit. Bobby Brink, we think is a hit. You know, had a pretty good rookie year. Tyson Forrester, big hit. Emil Andre, probably a hit, we assume. Samu Tuamala seems like he's going to be a hit. And I guess we'll do top two picks because 3 was Kolosov. Seems like also right now seems like a hit. Cutter Gauthier was definitely a hit. Devin Kaplan, we're not sure, but
I think that's iffy. Yeah,
Alex Bump and Hunter McDonald though in the mid is pretty good.
might
But
be
then
that's iffy as well though. You gotta wait and see.
yeah,
But
of course, yeah, you're right. And then this past year, Michkov and Bonk. So at least in the top,
and Barkey too, I guess.
yeah. But let's just stay 1 and 2, right? Because you're right. And so it's Tuamala, Gautier, Michkov, Bonk, Forrester, Andre, York, and Brink.
That's pretty good. Yeah, it's pretty good success rate. It looks like, right?
I would say he hit realistically potentially hit on 100% of the
Yeah, I
top
think you
picks.
could take away like I think Andre and Tuamala are your guys that you're like waiting and seeing on
Right.
there.
Who are second round
Um,
picks.
exactly, right? So, like I said, like Flair's done a really good job, and I mean, I've said it on the podcast in the past. Like I mentioned a ton with Minnesota. He did a great job with drafting. Like a lot of the players that ended up on those Minnesota teams that were making second round playoffs, things like that, were his draft picks. So he's a good drafter. And the track record shows it. Not even just here and what he's done, but also back in Minnesota. So it's not
Yeah.
surprising to me, to be honest.
And let's look at Hextall real quick. I'll just go through the first round picks. Travis Sanheim, Travis Konecny, Ivan Provorov, German Rubtsov, Nolan Patrick, Morgan Frost, Joel Farabee, and Jay O'Brien. That's like
Like 50% almost. Yeah.
yeah, a little bit higher, like 60%. Hit on Farabee, hit on Frost. Patrick, he didn't hit, and
You
that was
didn't hit
second
on him. Yeah.
overall. And it might be because of injuries, but you didn't hit. German Rubtsov definitely didn't hit. Provorov, I would say, is a hit.
Yeah.
Konecny definitely a hit, and Sanheim a hit.
Yeah. I'd say like 60%, but ultimately, if you're in the first round, you want to be around 80%.
Yeah,
Like you can afford to miss one or two, but once you're missing three or four, that's when you get into because you got to factor, right? If you're not hitting those first round picks, it's way harder to hit on the second, third, fourth, fifth round picks. So
yeah.
you know what I mean? This is the rounds it's supposed to be more of a guarantee.
And it
But yeah.
shows, and real quick, I'm just really enjoying this. And then I guess this is the Holmgren era, but it was like Yoni Pitkinen, Mike Richards, Jeff Carter didn't have one, Steve Downey, Claude Giroux.
I don't know if I'd call Downey a hit. Like he's in the league, but
Right, exactly. I mean, he did all right, but
yeah.
he was a late first round pick. Claude Giroux, James Van Riemsdyk, Lucas Spiza, who wasn't a hit. Um, Not a first round pick at number 19. That's like more of a second, third round pick.
Yeah.
Sean Couturier hit. Scott Lawton, late first round pick, number 20. Pretty
He's
good
still in
pick.
the league, so I would say yeah.
And he's a pretty big impact for what he
Yeah.
is. And Sam Morin.
Not a hit,
Yeah.
unfortunately. It
So
sucks, but he's not. So
you see the record prior to that it looks like Flair is doing better than the predecessors.
past three regimes.
Far.
Yeah.
We don't really know yet, but so far more hits
On the
than the
surface
previous
level, it's looking
regimes.
pretty good so far for him. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. I guess the prospects thing, the only thing we can really say is London did lose in the Memorial Cup to oh
Yeah.
man, Saginaw.
Yeah. It's unfortunate because they played so good all
They lost
season, but
4-3. Yeah.
they literally picked the final Memorial Cup game to have one of their worst games of the season. But that's, you know what it is, man. That's just hockey, right? Like you never
Yeah.
know when it's going to be your worst game. But it sucks for them because their whole goal was to get back the Memorial Cup and win, and then to get back there and lose
Yeah.
again. It's kind of just like, oh my God, punch in the teeth. But they had a really great season. Barkey specifically played really well. It's really encouraging for the Flyers in their development because they
Yeah.
took huge strides this season, their development, both those guys.
I'm pretty sure Bonk had 2 assists in that final game. He
Yeah,
ended
played
with
well.
16 points, 7 goals, 19 assists in 18 games, plus
Yeah.
16. And that's pretty damn good. And where's Barkey? Let's see what Barkey ended with. He also had great numbers, 27 points in 18 games, 6 goals, 21 assists. So, which is comparable to what he did the previous year. So, not a huge jump. He actually scored less goals, but he had more assists. Plus 10 this year. He was plus 12 last year. So, pretty good stuff. Unfortunate for them, but looking forward to seeing them at Dev Camp and at preseason. I'm definitely looking forward to that. I assume they'll be part of at least training camp, and
Yeah, of
then
course.
both of them will probably be sent back relatively quickly. Maybe Bonk will get a longer look, but we'll see. You know, they'll have an off season to kind of train and bulk up, but realistically, they both need another year. And I doubt the Flyers are going to rush bringing them in. All right, let's end on playoff talk. So, my prediction of Edmonton Dallas was completely wrong. I thought Dallas was going to
Oh, same.
wipe them, and I looked stupid saying they were up 2-0, even though I mocked Edmonton for that for blowing a 2-0 lead the game before. I will say in that final game, that is the most disappointing entrance to a finals by getting your ass handed to you the entire game and winning 2-1 because you have McDavid essentially.
Yeah.
In my opinion, they were not the better team in that series and they still won. So kudos to them. I will say this, Edmonton did play much better defense, tighter defense. Dallas did not have a single power play goal in that series.
Which is huge, yeah.
And we talk about how important special teams are, and that ended up being the difference maker. And the reason that Dallas probably is not in the finals. And I was a little surprised. I thought Dallas was going to beat Edmonton, but again, this is the best Edmonton Oilers team we have seen on paper and on the ice. And you know, shout out to former Flyers assistant coach Chris Knobloch, who really
Doing a good
rallied his
job,
team.
yeah.
Yeah,
No, really interesting series. It was a lot of great hockey to watch, like back
Yeah.
and forth, obviously. Um, I would say I wasn't expecting Edmonton to come back and win. I thought Dallas had it, but that's why, it's the beauty of the playoffs. You don't know what's going to happen, and this is why we watch, right? So to see Edmonton come back winning the way they did, it's pretty exciting. And you have to imagine, like, it's great for the league, obviously, to have your best player, Connor McDavid, be in the finals and use that as a marketing tool to get people to watch, the finals. How many times have we seen viewership up for all the rounds and the finals hits and viewership drops because nobody's interested in the teams that made it for some reason.
Yeah.
But with McDavid, they're going to be interested, and with Kachuk, obviously, they're going to be interested. So the other series, Rangers in Florida, and to be honest, I thought that was the one of the best series I watched all playoffs. So back and forth. Obviously, it doesn't get to that game seven. I believe Florida wins it in 6 games. I thought it was going to go seven, but
I thought
kudos to
both series
Florida.
were.
Yeah, kudos to Florida because I thought there was times where the Rangers really had them stunned, and then they were able to flip the momentum back and end up winning some games where I thought the Rangers had the edge actually for some of the play. So it was interesting, but actually most of that series, like Florida controlled a lot of the play, more high danger chances, more shot attempts than the Rangers. So if you look at it from that way and just like the underlying analytics, the better team did win in the Panthers. But yeah, I guess we can do just to end like our predictions for the finals. I do think that Florida's going to take it. I think they're going to win in 6 games. Um, Reason being for me is the goaltending. I'm always going to go back to the goaltending, and I think if you're in a final, I'd much rather have Sergei Bobrovsky, behind my team and leading me to potentially win a cup versus Stuart Skinner. I think Skinner's, played well, but I think Bobrovsky just being in the final last year, so much playoff experience. I think he's really going to shine and show his value and probably steal a couple games here for the Panthers.
Yeah, you know me, I picked the Panthers early on, and nothing has changed there. Especially now that they have to play Edmonton. Look, it could be the McDavid Draisaitl show, and that's
It
Edmonton's
wouldn't be
best.
surprising, yeah.
Well, look, that's their best asset, but they're gonna have to face Barkov, who's arguably the best defensive center in the
And
league,
Kachuk, yeah,
and Kachuk, and every single thing that Edmonton has, Florida has more. Um, and I think I would have taken Florida over
yeah.
Dallas also.
Agreed. I would have
Um,
too.
so yeah, Florida in 6, I think sounds about right. I mean, we could end up being wrong, but I think if we are
Hey,
wrong, it's because McDavid and Draisaitl were the difference makers.
yeah, it took over. Definitely.
Yeah,
I would love to see 7 game series in the finals. I can't remember the last time we saw a final for the NHL go to 7 games. It's definitely
would be
been years
cool.
at this point. Would be real cool. One thing I wanted to mention, shout out to Flyers Daily, like Bill Meltzer, Jason Martinez. They brought this up on the show. I thought this is gonna be a huge factor, right? Like that or not Barkov, that Ekblad pairing with Gustav Forsling. They actually haven't allowed any 5-on-5 goals against in all the series they've been on the ice so far. So you just look at it that way and look at that defensive pairing and how important it is to have a top pairing that you could trot out consistently against these top lines
Yeah.
and let in any goals against 5-on-5 throughout almost this whole playoff. Like that's
Ek
insane stat. Like
Ekblad's best year, how old is he? 28 years old?
I think he's almost around 30 or something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah. Funny how he didn't fall off a cliff, you know?
Even after all the injuries, like
Yeah.
breaking his leg
And
and
Gustav Forsling, he was waived by 2 different teams, I think,
yeah,
prior to that, right? So somehow people didn't know he would be what he is. Funny how this seems to happen every year.
these
Every
great
year.
teams, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
And then
Ekblad's
people go like, how
28
did
years
this
old.
happen?
I was about to say Ekblad being 28 makes me feel old because I'm
Yeah. Do you
28.
remember
So
when he
I'm
was
like,
picked? He was picked here in Philly.
oh man, yeah, first overall pick. Crazy, but
I
it's gonna
wanted
be a
him.
it's gonna be a real good series for Florida and Edmonton. I'm hoping it goes the distance, but yeah, I think Florida's gonna take it at the end
Yeah,
here.
absolutely. Yeah, my money's on Florida too, and I think Flyers are most likely. And look, if Edmonton wins, it's good for us because that means we get the 31st pick.
Very true. Yeah. So you gotta look at it
Yeah.
that way. If you're a
I
Flyers fan, you want Edmonton to win.
I
So
also think that Florida not touching the President's Trophy this time and going back, it's like almost fate,
yeah,
like
kind of.
it
Yeah.
seems like one of those hockey narratives.
The hockey gods like you should have touched it again,
You
doubled down.
should,
How they lose.
yeah.
Very fun. Hey, I mean, for me, I think Florida's gonna win. I really would love to see a Canadian team. Like I'm from
It's been
Canada,
30
I'm
years,
Canadian.
bro. It's been
Yeah, so
30
like it'd
years.
be great to see a Canadian team win here.
Yeah.
So for that reason, go Edmonton. But I do think like the logical side of me, I'm thinking it's gonna be Florida.
Yeah, I think so too. I think Florida's physicality is going to be too much for Edmonton. Even though
Yeah,
Edmonton's been pretty physical, it just this is the most physical team in the playoffs, and they have the
agreed.
talent
Yeah,
to match you. And I'm not convinced that Edmonton would have beat Vegas.
or Colorado.
Yeah, even though Dallas did, but Dallas also, in my opinion, outplayed Edmonton and
I
still
think to
lost.
be honest, I think though the fact that Dallas to play those better teams leading into Edmonton
Wore
kind of
them
hurt
down.
them.
Yeah,
Well, because yeah, you have to play the top almost the top other two teams in the conference, and Edmonton got to fucking go through LA and Vancouver. Like they got
yeah,
to change the
yeah,
system and go back to 1 versus 8. In my opinion, I
yeah,
think it's just not fair to some of the better teams. They got to play
yeah,
way better teams way earlier than they should, in my opinion.
yeah.
So.
I agree. I agree with you. It's like you're punishing regular season success
Yeah,
in a
pretty
way.
much in a
Yeah.
sense. Yeah,
All right, dude. This one was a long one. Went over 2 hours.
it's
Anything
crazy
you
because we thought we didn't have anything to talk about. So
It happens every week, bro. So anything you want to leave our audience with?
no, just the usual stuff. Articles on flyersnittygritty.com coming out throughout the month, and we're getting closer to the draft stuff. So the draft content's gonna you're gonna see it slowly ramp up and ramp up and ramp up. So keep an eye
Yeah,
out there, everybody.
yeah. Well said. All right. Thank you again, everybody, for listening. You guys are awesome. Shout out to our sponsors, Jim Steaks, Fourth and South. Make sure to go get yourself a cheesesteak from Jim Steaks. They're open again. And Public Summit Adjusters, 215-752-0560. Go to them for all your insurance adjustment needs. Again, that's 215-752-0560. And yeah, just a reminder, please like and subscribe and, follow us on iTunes and Spotify. Give us a rating there if you can. Hit the notification bell on YouTube for notifications. And again, if you made it this far, listening, you have not subscribed, please do so. It's the best way to support us. But we love you guys. You guys are awesome. Thank you so much for listening. Again, we'll be here all through the summer and lots of draft content coming. So we're excited for the off season, just like you are. And we love you guys. And remember, always stay